Chapter 4387. The world gradually calmed down. Gong Fan leaned against the window and looked at the stars that gradually drifted into the distance. Then he could no longer see them, but his heart was unprecedentedly calm. Everything is over. Then, Gong Fan turned his head and was puzzled. What about us? What should we do? Help me. Yu stretched out his hand. Gong Fan smiled and reached out his hand. The two of them held each other's hands tightly. He pulled him up. Yu's legs went soft and he almost fell again. Gong Fan immediately supported him steadily. Be careful. Yu finally steadied himself. He looked up and met his eyes. Gong Fan also looked at him calmly. Are you afraid? What are you afraid of? Gong Fan smiled and did not think much of it. What's there to be afraid of when I'm with you? Gong Fan, come with me. Yu opened his arms and smiled gently. Become one with me. We'll never be separated again. Gong Fan suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Yu, how does it feel to become one with you? Gong Fan laughed. Will I be able to see Mommy again? I don't know either. Yu pursed his lips and said, Alice told me that the goal this time is to find you, get rid of all the negative personalities, and become one with you. This way, we won't be separated for the rest of our lives. We'll be together forever. Really? Are you willing? Gong Fan nodded solemnly. I'm willing. He also opened his arms and hugged Yu tightly. The two little guys hugged each other tightly. Yu closed his eyes quietly and said softly, Gong Fan, let's go home together. I miss Mommy and I miss Daddy, Gong Fan sniffed and smiled. He hugged Yu even tighter. Let's go home together. The two children hugged each other tightly. Gradually, their bodies became transparent. Yu was surprised to find that Gong Fan's body was emitting spots of light. It was as if he was surrounded by the Milky Way. Could it be that he was going to disappear? Impossible. Gong Fan was not dead. It was impossible for him to disappear. Yu hugged him even tighter. Gradually, Gong Fan's body became even more transparent. He slowly merged into Yu's body. In a daze, Yu saw Gong Fan's eyes filled with determination and conviction. Yu, we promised that we would never separate. We agreed to go home together. These were the last words that Gong Fan said to Yu. Yu's bosom gradually became empty. Gong Fan turned into countless stars and revolved around him. For a moment, the world was dark. Gradually, the manor disappeared, and so did the forest. Yu opened his eyes and could only see the barren darkness around him. There was only a patch of stars surrounding him. He gently opened his palm. A few stars fell on his palm, giving him a great sense of warmth. What a warm feeling! The stars surrounded him and finally flowed into his body bit by bit. It was as if countless warm currents were flowing into his body. Chapter 4388. Yu is awake. Early in the morning, Alice was like a happy bird as she passed on the good news. Yu is awake. Xianxia opened the door and saw Alice standing at the doorway with tears in her eyes. She was touched and comforted. She looked at Xianxia and stuck out her tongue. Tears rolled down her cheeks because of joy. Xianxia, Yu is awake. It was just a few words, but her tone was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Xianxia could even hear the slight tremble in her voice. What do you mean by awake? Through the brain imaging, we found that his two personalities have merged together. All the memories of Gong Fan and Yu have been preserved and merged together. In other words, the two personalities of Yu and Gong Fan have merged together perfectly. As Alice spoke, she finally relaxed her brows. Yu has returned to the way he was in the past. Sure, I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Because of the matter between Yu and Gong Fan, she did not dare to face Xianxia and felt very guilty. After all, she could not erase her responsibility for causing the child to become like this. However, now that Yu and Gong Fan had merged together and returned to the past, this was an outcome that everyone was happy to see. The old Yu has returned. Xianxia, who had been in a daze for a long time, finally woke up because of this sentence. Where is he now? He is still in the hospital bed in the laboratory. As he has just finished the brain imaging, he is a little sleepy. I asked him to eat something before resting. Xianxia could not hide her excitement. Can I go and see him now? Of course. As soon as she finished speaking, Alice saw Xianxia running towards the dining room. Yu Yu. His heart was filled with these two burning words. Yu had finally returned to the past, while Gong Fan remained in his body forever. She had not lost a single one. Xianxia was crying tears of joy as she ran. After being in fear for so long, she was even prepared to lose Gong Fan. She flew all the way here in fear. She was worried that this would be the last time she would see Gong Fan. Unexpectedly, Yu and Gong Fan were safe and sound. At this moment, the excitement in her heart was indescribable. Xianxia ran without a care for her own safety. She ran through the long corridor and rushed into the laboratory. When she reached the door, her footsteps slowed down. Strangely, after running for so long and so fast, he didn't feel tired at all. Xianxia stood at the door and looked at Yu, who was lying on the bed, looking weak but calmly eating porridge. Her tears fell uncontrollably again. This was the joy of regaining what he had lost, as well as guilt, joy, and all sorts of other complex emotions. Her lips trembled. She resisted the urge to cry and walked to Yu's bedside. Yu's hand that was eating porridge paused. He looked up and saw that it was Xianxia. At first he was shocked. Then he revealed that unfamiliar, long-lost, but incomparably familiar doting smile. Good morning, Mommy. It was a simple greeting, but it was warm. Although Yu and Gong Fan had always been around, ever since the two personalities separated, Yu was no longer the original him. The Yu of the past had a warm smile that was full of doting. Chapter 4389. In this smile, Xianxia vaguely saw Yu and Gong Fan again. They had returned to the past. Xianxia covered her mouth and cried tears of joy. Boo-hoo, she let out a whimper. Seeing her like this, Yu held his forehead helplessly. Mommy, why are you crying? Aren't I fine? Even though he said that, his eyes had unknowingly turned completely red. His lips were trembling badly as if he was trying his best to hold something back. Yu tried his best to smile, but when the corners of his lips curled up, it looked like he was crying. Xianxia couldn't hold it in anymore. She pounced on the bed and hugged him tightly. Mommy missed you so much. Mommy missed you so much. She thought that she would never see Gong Fan again. She didn't expect, at that moment, there were too many emotions in her heart. Yu hugged her too, and gently stroked the back of her head. Even though he was still a teenager, his actions exuded a mature aura. Okay, don't cry, okay? Mommy, I'm sorry to have made you worry. Yu gently patted her face. Then he gently held her face. Looking at the stream of tears on her face, his heart ached. He lowered his eyelashes, leaned closer to her, and gently kissed away the tears on her face. The intimacy between a mother and son was natural. No one could surpass the bond between her and Yu. This had nothing to do with favoritism. During her most difficult time, she and Yu depended on each other. The two of them were each other's strongest support and reliance. This bond was something that even Gong Jie couldn't surpass. The others also arrived one after another. Wuxia and Xiao Yichen were the first to arrive, followed by Gong Jie and Hua Jin. When Xiao Yichen saw Xianxia and Yu hugging each other tightly, he was deeply touched. It wasn't envy or jealousy, but an inexplicable sadness in his heart. If he really wanted to say that he was envious, he was probably envious of this bond. Xiao Yichen was also affected by their emotions. His eyes reddened as he held Wuxia's hand tightly. Wuxia sensed the change in his emotions. He lowered his head and glanced at him, only to see him staring in the direction of Xianxia and Xiao Yichen. The man smiled and put his arm around Xiao Yichen's shoulders, patting him gently. Aren't you going to hug Mommy and brother? His reminder also seemed like encouragement. Originally, Xiao Yichen felt extremely guilty because he had doubted Yu and Gong Fan previously. Now, he looked at them and felt touched, but he didn't dare to go forward for fear of being ostracized by Yu. Wuxia obviously knew what he was thinking. When they were at the hospital, Xiao Yichen thought that Gong Fan had stabbed his mommy. He was extremely agitated and even said a lot of outrageous things. He was extremely upset. He shouldn't have doubted his brother. Because of this, he felt very regretful and didn't dare to take that step no matter what. After Mu Yaji's encouragement, he finally mustered up his courage. He clenched his fists and walked to Yu Yu's bed. Yu Yu, he called his name in a deep voice. Yu Yu heard his voice and turned around. When he saw that it was Xiao Yichen, he couldn't help but smile. Brother? Her brother made little Yichen feel as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. Chapter 4390. Amused, Yu Yu tugged at his hand. Of all people, this was a sore spot. No way. Are you crying? Xiao Yichen stubbornly denied it, but everyone could hear the hoarseness in his voice as he choked on his sobs. In front of Yu Yu, as an older brother, he still had some dignity and did not cry easily. Now that his eyes were red, naturally, he did not want Yu Yu to see it. Yu Yu did not stand on ceremony and gently tugged at Xiao Yichen's sleeve again. Brother? Xiao Yichen called him brother. This time, it hit the weakest spot in Xiao Yichen's heart. Brother, I missed you. How about you? Did you miss me? Xiao Yichen lowered his head and laughed. I missed you, then. Yu Yu was full of anticipation. Aren't you going to hug me? Xiao Yichen turned around and finally looked at him. Yu Yu looked at his red eyes and said angrily, Why are you crying? I'm not missing an arm or a leg. Aren't I fine? Xiao Yichen could no longer hold back and hugged Xiao Yichen tightly. Xianxia looked at them with gratification. The reunion of the two brothers caused everyone present to sigh with emotion. Gong Jie, too, was deeply affected by this. Feeling touched, he stepped forward and was about to reach out to hug the two brothers when Yu Yu raised his head, only to be met with a familiar cold face. Go away. Gong Jie's touched expression froze. The touched feeling in his heart was immediately replaced by embarrassment. Gong Jie was furious. He had been so touched by the touching brotherly love just now. In the end, with just one sentence from Yu Yu, he was struck by lightning. Hey! Gong Jie's face was full of resentment. Can't I hug you even if I want to? He even said that he was touched. What a heartless guy. No, go away. Gong Jie became even more suspicious. When did uncle offend you? Do you have to target me like this? Puchi. Xiao Jie, did you do something to offend you or Gong Fan? Otherwise, why would he be so against you? Hearing Xianxia's question, Gong Jie really thought about it carefully, but he couldn't figure out how he had offended this little nephew. He shook his head blankly. Hua Jin said, Looks like you must have offended Yu by accident. Otherwise, why would she target you and no one else? Gong Jie said angrily, You heartless bastard. Why don't you think about it? Uncle has worked so hard to support your little lover. Little lover. Everyone turned pale with fright. These words were undoubtedly like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Alice had just arrived with Natalia. Hearing that, she was caught unprepared and burst into laughter. Ha! Yu Yu's face instantly turned red when he heard this. What are you talking about? Xianxia's interest was piqued. Little lover? What little lover? Gong Jie obviously didn't know that Alice had arrived with Natalia. He said in all seriousness, Sis, you don't know. Back then, it was this good son of yours who cried and begged me to adopt Natalia. Even a ghost could tell that this guy was up to no good. Xianxia heard this and opened her mouth in surprise. No way. Yu is still so young. How can he know all this? How can he have his first awakening of love so early? Children these days are all mature early. Yu retorted unhappily, When did I cry and beg? Who was the one who cried and begged me to adopt her? Chapter 4391. Still trying to deny it? Gong Jie snorted coldly. Uncle worked so hard to raise your childhood sweetheart, but you don't appreciate it at all. You even dissed Uncle. Where's your conscience? Yu immediately explained to Xianxia. I just felt that Natalia was staying in such a cold and empty hospital, so I felt sorry for her and wanted to help her find a home. Uncle, you're thinking about things you shouldn't be thinking about. Damn pervert. Gong Jie was furious. Who are you calling a damn pervert? Yu Yu rolled his eyes arrogantly. I'm talking about you. Damn pervert. Gong Jie pushed Xianxia and Xiao Yichen away and rolled up his sleeves. Fine. Yu Yu, we're not done. With that said, Gong Jie angrily reached out to pull Yu Yu's face. Yu Yu's face was very delicate and couldn't withstand his pulling. His face was twisted out of shape by the pulling. Xiao Yichen held back his laughter and pretended to persuade Yu Yu. Uncle, don't bully Yu Yu. Be careful not to damage his face. I'll take responsibility if it damages his face. Yi didn't cry out in pain. He stretched out his hand and wanted to pull Gong Jie's face back. However, Gong Jie's hand was much longer than his. It was easy for him to pull Yu Yu's face, but Yu Yu couldn't grab his face. Yu Yu was flustered and exasperated. Gong Jie. The little guy was so angry that he called out his name. One could imagine how angry he was. Gong Jie was even more amused. He didn't intend to let go. Who told you to call me a damn pervert? I'll give you a chance. Call me uncle and I'll let you go. In your dreams. Then I won't hold back. With that said, Gong Jie exerted more force. Everyone was tickled by this. Even Natalia couldn't help but laugh at this scene. Yu Yu had sharp ears and immediately heard her laugh. She turned to look at her and was caught off guard when she saw that she had also come. Let go. He glared fiercely at Gong Jie as if warning him. Gong Jie also heard that Natalia was coming and immediately sent her away. The uncle and nephew looked at the main character awkwardly. Alright, stop messing around. Xianxia advised from the side and clapped her hands. Today is a day worth celebrating. Why don't we think of a way to celebrate? When Gong Jie heard Xianxia's words, he also felt that it was a good idea. Uncle, how do you plan to celebrate? Why don't we have a barbecue at the beach? Gong Jie has a collection of rare and precious wines in his wine cellar. Let's take them out today and have a taste. Gong Jie's face was full of regret after being betrayed by Alice. Those wines are all antiques. No way. Antiques. Wuxia's interest was piqued and he glanced at his brother-in-law. Alice immediately reminded him. It's said that he has a bottle of sherry wine from 1775. This wine is very rare and priceless in today's market. Some people will sell it at high prices, but it's all fake. Xiaojia's bottle of sherry wine, however, is the real deal. When he brought it back, the fragrance was unique. Wuxia was in high spirits. Looks like we're in for a treat today. Gong Jie snorted coldly. Don't even think about it. This wine is for me to taste in the future. Don't even think about coveting it. Xianxia felt wronged and said, sherry wine from 1775. I've heard of it but I've never seen it before. Xiao Jie, why don't you take it out and let me see it? Gong Jie was speechless. Chapter 4392. Gong Jie said fiercely, if you want to loot my wine cellar, you'll have to do it over my dead body. 2 hours later. It was dusk by the beach and the waves were rolling. There was barbecue and champagne on the table. On the other side of the table were the hidden wines that Xianxia and Wuxia had looted from Gong Jie's wine cellar. Gong Jie sat weakly on the beach chair as if he was paralyzed. His eyes were empty and he looked as if he had nothing left to live for. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked at him with heartache, but they didn't know how to comfort him. Yu Yu sighed. So pitiful, Xiao Yichen nodded. Yes, very pitiful. If I hadn't heard from Alice, I wouldn't have known that uncle was so rich. Sherry wine from 1775, pop. Wuxia opened the cork of the sherry wine. The captivating aroma was carried by the sea breeze to Gong Jie. Gong Jie turned his head and looked at the sherry wine that he had hidden for so long in Wuxia's hand. His heart ached so much that he almost couldn't breathe. My sherry, men don't cry easily. However, at this moment, Gong Jie couldn't help but tear up. He had never been in a relationship before, so he didn't know what it felt like to be heartbroken. It was probably as painful as he was now. He was heartbroken. Here comes the main event. Alice held the wine glass and happily went over to Wuxia. She poured half a glass of wine, but she couldn't bear to drink it. If she drank it, it would cost more than tens of thousands of US dollars. This sherry wine was Gong Jie's heart, Gong Jie's liver, and Gong Jie's spleen, lungs, and kidneys. At the thought of this, Alice was strangely excited. It was very difficult for her to take advantage of Gong Jie. Alice walked up to Gong Jie. Seeing that he was still gloomy, she raised her eyebrows as if to provoke him. "Xiao Jie, aren't you going to have a drink?" There were a total of 2 bottles of sherry wine, but with so many people, each person only had 1 glass, and 1 bottle was soon empty. Gong Jie glared at her. "Are you very pleased with yourself? To be able to taste sherry wine while I'm still alive, of course I'm proud." Alice raised her goblet and smiled obnoxiously. There's an old saying, "Enjoy life to the fullest." What a great saying. Enjoy life to the fullest. Gong Jie gritted his teeth and stood up from the recliner. Everyone was drinking. Wouldn't it be a pity if he didn't drink after saving him? No way. He wanted to drink, and he had to fight for it. This was his wine, and he had to drink it sooner or later. If he drank too much, he would end up in his stomach, lest others covet it. After thinking it through, Gong Jie walked to Mu Yaja's side. However, he saw that Hua Jin was also leaning against him, holding a goblet. After drinking 2 glasses, he felt that the wine was too delicious, so he came over for a 3rd glass. The 2nd bottle of sherry wine was opened, and half of it was already gone. Gong Jie was furious when he saw this. Feeling that there was something scary behind him, Hua Jin turned around, only to see Gong Jie glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey. He burped in fright. "Who allowed you to drink so much?" Gong Jie vented his anger on him. Hua Jin pouted, feeling wronged. "I didn't drink that much. Even if it was the 3rd glass, half a glass, it wouldn't be much." Gong Jie's eyes looked as if they were about to spit fire. "Enough is enough, all of you." "Ha!" Xianxia looked at Gong Jie's distressed expression and for some reason, she was amused. Chapter 4393. Gong Jie got even angrier. "Is it that funny?" "Xiao Jie, is this wine your lifeline?" Xianxia asked with a pout. Gong Jie said matter-of-factly, "Of course. This wine is my lifeline." "So you're saying that this wine is more important than me?" Xianxia was so cunning that she had completely forgotten about him. Gong Jie disagreed. "How is that possible? Of course you're more important. Then I want you to share this wine with everyone. You've already drunk it, yet you're still pulling a long face. If you don't drink to your heart's content, won't it lose its value?" Gong Jie was speechless. She made so much sense that he couldn't refute her. "That's enough." Xianxia walked over and patted his shoulder gently. She handed him the wine glass. "Drink. It's rare that we're so happy today. It's a day worth celebrating. Don't look so sad, okay?" For Xianxia's sake, Gong Jie's anger dissipated quickly. He took the wine glass silently and took a sip. Hua Jin, who was beside him, immediately moved away from him, trembling in fear. No matter what, he had to stay away from this demon king. "Mommy, I want to drink too." Xianxia suddenly ran over. He held the wine glass and stared at the sherry wine. Xianxia said, "No, children can't drink. It's just red wine. It doesn't matter. Besides, every bottle of sherry wine I drink is 1 less bottle. When I grow up, I won't even have the chance to drink it." That was heart-wrenching. This sentence undoubtedly dealt another heavy blow to Gong Jie. That's right. The more he drank, the less he would drink because it was limited. He wouldn't have the chance to drink it again in the future. Xianxia couldn't persuade Xianxia and could only pour half a glass for him. Seeing that Xianxia was drinking, Yu craved the wine as well. She brought the wine glass to Xianxia and asked for half a glass. "Cheers." "Cheers." Ding. Ding, sounds were heard. Several people raised their goblets and toasted. Xianxia walked up to Gong Jie and winked mischievously. "Come, Xiao Jie. Cheers." For some reason, when he saw Xianxia's gentle smile, the haze in his heart was instantly swept away. He gladly raised his goblet and clinked it with hers. "Cheers." "I'll do it. You can do whatever you want." Xianxia seemed to be in high spirits, so she drank all the wine in the cup in one go. With a smile on his lips, Gong Jie downed the wine in his glass in one gulp. One must enjoy life to the fullest. Cherishing every day, cherishing every moment, this was the profound meaning of happiness. Gong Jie raised his wineglass and looked at the moon in the sky through the transparent crystal glass. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his gaze became blurry. It was as if his soul had been drawn away. The sea breeze blew gently, making one feel comfortable. Yun Shirshir was soon half-drunk. Alice, Hua Jin, and Natalia surrounded the barbecue and spared no effort in grilling scallops. Hua Jin didn't have much experience, but Alice had always been by the sea. Thus, she had many tricks for grilling scallops and oysters. After a while, an enticing aroma filled the air with the sea breeze. It smells so good. A few gluttonous people walked over when they smelled the aroma. Alice placed the grilled scallops and oysters on a plate and sprinkled some seasoning. It was comparable to a barbecue feast at a 5-star restaurant. Those who don't know better would think that you're a 5-star chef, Hua Jin said quietly. Chapter 4394. When Alice heard this, she did not think much of it. But the chefs on the island roast better than me. I learned it secretly. The seaside is so nice. Hua Jin sighed from the bottom of his heart. Alice was a little surprised when she heard this. Why do you suddenly have such a sigh? Because the seaside is so beautiful. Don't you think so? During the day, you can swim and dive in the sea. At night, you can sit quietly by the sea, enjoy the sea breeze and eat seafood. It's the most comfortable feeling in life. Shallow. Alice gave a pertinent evaluation. Why do you say that? Living by the sea actually has many advantages. For example, the sea view is very beautiful. There is very little noise by the sea. You can swim every day. There are many minerals in the sea that can improve your skin and improve your physical fitness. The air is also very fresh. However, the sea breeze always carries a fishy smell. In addition, there are many problems with humidity by the sea. For example, clothes are always easy to get wet. The railings of the doors and windows are easy to corrode. Moreover, it's easy to get rheumatism. If you encounter a typhoon or a tsunami, living by the sea is simply a disaster. Hua Jin was slightly stunned. He seemed to have really not thought of these problems. So, there are many sides to every problem. Life is never perfect. It is always accompanied by all kinds of regrets. Yes. However, there are happiness and regrets. This is life. Perfect. Don't you feel that it's boring? Alice raised her wineglass and gently swirled the wine in the glass with a deep smile. Life is to experience all kinds of ups and downs. This is the greatest meaning of life. However, this is what I think. Everyone's values are different. Perhaps others will not agree. I think I will agree with your view. Hua Jin pursed his lips and smiled. There is absolutely no perfection in life. There is no doubt about this. If a person's life is too smooth, that would be unbelievable. Grasp every regret and cherish every happiness. Well said. Hua Jin raised his wineglass. To your chicken soup for the soul. Cheers. Alice drank the wine in one gulp. Yu suddenly muttered, "What are you guys talking about? The scallops are about to win." Alice looked at her own barbecue grill. Sure enough, the scallop meat was trembling and making a slightly charred sound. This is also one of the regrets of my life. Hua Jin put the burnt scallop aside. A burnt scallop is an imperfection in life. Alice smiled knowingly. Not far away, Gong Jie was lying on a recliner, watching this harmonious scene, especially when he saw Hua Jin and Alice talking and laughing. He didn't know why, but he felt a little irritated. The two of them seemed to be getting along quite well. Could it be that Hua Jin was interested in Alice? Thinking of this possibility, Gong Jie felt a strange sense of crisis. Even he himself did not understand why he had such an inexplicable feeling. At night, after the party was over, Hua Jin walked back to his room. In the corridor, he unexpectedly bumped into Gong Jie. He leaned against the door of his room with his arms crossed, as if waiting for someone. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel strange. It's so late. Why aren't you going back to your room to rest? Chapter 4395. It can't be? You're drunk? Hua Jin sniffed and looked up, but his eyes met with Gong Jie's deep gaze. He got a shock and deliberately distanced himself from Gong Jie. Gong Jie couldn't help but tease him. Am I so scary that you want to keep your distance from me? Drunk people like to find fault with him. Of course, he had to keep his distance. Besides, Gong Jie was so violent. What if he got drunk and lost control and beat him up? Hua Jin looked at him anxiously. Calm down. How am I not calm down? Then, since you're drunk, you should go back to your room and rest. How can you tell that I'm drunk? I can tell from how much you talk. However, Hua Jin only dared to say that in his heart. If he said that in front of Gong Jie, wouldn't he be courting death? You like Alice? Gong Jie's sudden question made Hua Jin stunned. What? Alice is such a scary woman. In the room, Alice had just finished bathing. She came out in a bathrobe and sneezed loudly. Who's talking bad about me? She muttered to herself as she walked towards the bed. What's scary? Do you know what her biggest interest is? Hua Jin's curiosity was piqued at once. What is it? Dissection. She especially likes to study the human body structure. She has dissected countless corpses. When she used to eat steak, she dissected it with a scalpel. Wretch. Hua Jin couldn't take it anymore and almost vomited. I'm not interested in Alice. Gong Jie raised an eyebrow and looked at her from the corner of his eyes. Then why did you chat with her for so long? He knew it now. This Gong Jie must be secretly in love with Alice. So, seeing that Alice chatted with him for so long, he was a little jealous. At this moment, they wouldn't come to denounce him, would they? Don't worry, I won't fight with you. Hua Jin promised him solemnly. This time, it was Gong Jie's turn to be confused. What did he mean by that? Not competing with him? Snatch what? Don't worry, I will keep a distance from Alice in the future. Hua Jin gave another guarantee. When Gong Jie heard this, he felt satisfied. Rest early. After Gong Jie finished speaking, he leisurely went back. Hua Jin looked at Gong Jie's departing back with a face full of question marks. He was suddenly at a loss. What a weirdo. Hua Jin entered the room and recalled Gong Jie's unfathomable expression. The more he thought about it, the stranger he felt. After recuperating at sea for a few days, Yun Shishir's wound healed very quickly. She told Mu Yaja that she wanted to stay on the island for a few more days. Coincidentally, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen also wanted to stay on the island for a few more days. However, there were still many matters piled up in the Xinyu financial group waiting for him to deal with. Hence, Mu Yaja chartered a plane to return to the country first. His time on the island was equivalent to a vacation. Yun Shishir knew that Gong Xiaoying was also on this island. However, perhaps he was worried about her, or perhaps he was afraid that Yun Shishir would not want to face him, so he did not appear in front of her. Yun Shishir knew in her heart that Gong Xiaoying was avoiding her. However, she also understood that he was avoiding her for her sake. He did not want to embarrass her. On this day, Yun Shishir suddenly said to Gong Jie, I want to see him. Chapter 4396. Why do you want to see father all of a sudden? Gong Jie was pleasantly surprised. He held Yun Shishir's shoulders in disbelief and asked, Have you decided to forgive father? Yun Shishir did not answer. Instead, she looked deeply at Gong Jie. The relationship between him and me is very complicated. However, I had secretly promised that if Yu Yu was safe and sound, I would choose to let go of everything and not bear any grudges. Now that Yu Yu is really safe and sound, perhaps even God is guiding me to forgive him. Gong Jie was comforted and asked, Don't you hate him anymore? Of course I do. How can I not hate him? As Yun Shishir spoke, she sighed and turned to look at the boundless sea. She smiled and said, I admit that I was too vicious in the past. At that time, I blamed all my misfortunes on him. Actually, she understood. All the fortune and misfortune in her life had been caused by that man. It was because of him that she had become an orphan. However, it was also because of him that she had become entangled with the Mu family. Everything that had happened after that, including the entanglement between her and Mu Yaja, was also because of him. However, all the misfortunes had made her hate him. However, she had not been grateful to him for all the good things that had happened. She wanted to punish him with such unfairness. However, in reality, they were the ones to be punished in the end. There was no winner or loser between the two of them. She had decided to let go of all her grudges. It could be considered as doing it for her family. It was not good to be too vicious in her body and in her heart. Wuxia was also aware of her decision. She had already told him in advance and asked for his opinion. What opinion could Wuxia have? After all, Gong Xiaoying was her father, her biological father. Blood was thicker than water. There were some things that could not be severed in this lifetime. Wuxia still had some opinions about this father-in-law of his. His own son had been cheated by his grandfather, and he had been cheated so miserably. As a son-in-law, no matter how much he tolerated it, he still had a sense of propriety. However, when Xianxia told him that she had decided to forgive Gong Xiaoying and asked for his opinion, Wuxia said, "This is a grudge between you and your father. It's not appropriate for me to get involved. However, no matter what decision you make, I will support you." Therefore, Wuxia left Dark Wind Island in advance and returned to the country. He wanted to leave Xianxia and Gong Xiaoying behind to deal with this matter. Gong Jie said, "If you really want to see him, I can arrange it for you right away." "There's no need for that. Where is he? I'll go see him." Gong Jie was very surprised by her initiative and nodded his head as well. He made a phone call. "Jed, where is my father now?" Zephyr Island is huge. On the huge island, many corners were filled with cameras. Jed was the designer in charge of security. No matter who the culprit was, as long as he called him, he would be able to find them immediately. "Master is in the castle." He reported Gong Xiaoying's location and did not ask too much. Gong Xiaoying brought Xianxia to the castle. After entering the castle, Gong Jie first brought Xianxia to the living room. Then he went to the study on the third floor to look for Gong Xiaoying. In the study, Gong Xiaoying was staring at the photo on the table in a daze. In the photo was a family photo of Xianxia and Wuxia. Gong Jie was also in the photo, and even Hua Jin was in it. However, he was not in it. This family photo was brought back by Gong Jie. Chapter 4397. He specially printed an extra photo and gave it to Gong Xiaoying. From then on, this photo replaced Mu Qingqing's photo in a photo frame and was placed on the desk. This was a place where he often saw it. Every time he felt tired, he would hold the photo and look at it for a while. His fingers caressed Xianxia's face, Yu's face, Xiao Yichen's face, Yuyao's face. This was a concern that he could not let go of no matter what. Other than that, he did not have any other thoughts. Originally, he was very obsessed with acknowledging Xianxia. He wanted to acknowledge her as father and daughter. Even if he had to resort to unscrupulous means, he would not give up until he achieved his goal. However, when he saw the series of pain that his decision had brought to Xianxia, it was impossible for him not to be upset. He realized how selfish his thoughts were. It was because of his selfishness that Mu Qingqing did not pick him up at the last moment. It was because of his selfishness that the daughter he cared about the most, who had been homeless for so many years, he had repeatedly hurt her because of his ignorance. He finally figured it out. Acknowledging her as father was not worth mentioning compared to his daughter living a good and happy life. Therefore, Gong Xiaoying did not ask for anything. As long as Xianxia could live a good and peaceful life, he did not ask for anything else. He did not expect to be forgiven. Although, if Xianxia would never forgive him for the rest of her life, perhaps this would become a heavier regret than Mu Qingqing. However, this was his own doing and he could not blame others. Even if Xianxia really did not forgive him, it was only right. He did not force anything. He was staring at the family photo in a daze when a voice suddenly came from beside him. "Father!" Gong Jie's sudden voice startled him. Gong Xiaoying looked up in surprise. When he saw Gong Jie pushing the door open and walking in, he immediately became serious. "Why did you come in without knocking?" Gong Jie said confidently, "I knocked on the door." "Are you deaf?" Gong Xiaoying was speechless. This kid was really becoming more and more impudent. In the past, she had always been well behaved in front of him. Gong Xiaoying awkwardly put the family portrait back to its original position. He cleared his throat and asked, "Your sister, did she leave?" Oh? How long does she intend to stay on the island? When Gong Jie heard this, he was a little suspicious. Father, are you chasing her away? Cough. Gong Xiaoying glared at him awkwardly. Why would I chase her away? It doesn't matter how long she stays on the island. He could afford to raise her for the rest of her life. He could even support the Xingyu financial group behind Mu Yaja, let alone Xianxia. Gong Xiaoying pretended not to care and said, if she likes it here, then let her stay for a while. The scenery here is good. It's not bad as a vacation spot. Gong Xiaoying introduced the island as if he was introducing a vacation spot. He pretended to casually ask her to stay, which made Gong Jian not know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, he felt a little sorry for her. Gong Xiaoying could not appear, but as a father he definitely hoped that Xianxia would stay on the island for a few more days. This feeling was like knowing that his daughter was on the island. Although he could not see her, he felt inexplicably at ease. After the age of 50, Gong Xiaoying had this feeling. Some people, once you met them, you would not see them again. Life was long and counting down. Chapter 4398. There were too many regrets in his life. As time passed, he cherished this little happiness even more. There was a sense of security because she was by his side. Even if he couldn't see her, it didn't matter. Gong Xiaoying couldn't show too much concern and could only ask Gong Jie indirectly. Does she like this place? Is she used to living here? Sometimes the sea breeze is strong and the waves are strong. As a man, you should protect your sister well. Gong Xiaoying asked one question after another, all of which were details. When Gong Jie heard this, he actually had the urge to cry. Gong Xiaoying had never shown this side of him before. He carefully tried to find out news about her from him. He wanted to give her the best and wanted her to stay on the island for one more day. That kind of cautious feeling was as if he would feel annoyed if she didn't like the small details. He was a devoted father who wanted to give her the best from the bottom of his heart. Why don't you ask her yourself? Ask her? Gong Xiaoying smiled helplessly. She hates me so much, how can I appear in front of her? As a father, I'm not qualified. As her younger brother, you can't wrong her. Do you understand? Father, you don't have to give orders like an officer. If she doesn't forgive you, are you going to hide from her forever? Gong Xiaoying was unhappy. When did I hide from her? Otherwise, why didn't you see her when she was on the island for so long? Gong Xiaoying was a little angry. So what if I see her? At that time, she was worried about you and I didn't dare to disturb her. Moreover, the person she didn't want to see the most was me. What if I suddenly saw her and she ran away in anger? So you're like a coward, locking yourself in the study and secretly looking at the family photos? Gong Jie's words were not pleasant to the ears. Gong Xiaoying was unhappy because of this. Your tone today is very problematic. What do you want to do? Provoke me? I'm just here to tell you. Gong Jie bent down and stared into his eyes. If she wants to see you, will you see her? Gong Xiaoying was stunned when he heard this. If she wants to see me? When Gong Xiaoying heard this, he immediately disagreed. How is that possible? Who are you trying to fool by saying this? Why would she want to see me? What good would it do me to lie to you? Gong Jie shrugged innocently. Besides, she's downstairs. You'll know whether I'm lying to you or not. Or are you afraid to go? Gong Xiaoying was stunned. He asked in a roundabout way, why does she want to see me? You have to ask yourself this question. It's not good for me to interfere in the matters between you and your father. After Gong Jie finished speaking, he raised his wrist and looked at his watch. She said she's willing to wait for you for 30 minutes. If you don't want to see her, she won't wait. Father, it's up to you. After saying this, Gong Jie walked away leisurely. Gong Xiaoying glared at his back view and said angrily, this little rascal, he has no respect for his elders. Following this, Gong Xiaoying actually didn't have the confidence to tell her that Xianxia wanted to see him. He didn't know why she wanted to see him. Could it be that he had been discovered secretly watching her through the surveillance camera? Chapter 4399. Other than that, what else could it be? Gong Xiaoying couldn't think of anything. He didn't dare to meet her rashly. He didn't know why, but he was actually very afraid of this daughter. His glass heart really couldn't afford to be hurt. If they met again, she would mock and ridicule him, and then make it clear that they would never see each other again. Then where should he put the glass shards on the ground? But he couldn't accept not meeting her. At that time, Gong Jie would definitely mock him for being a coward. He thought it through. Gong Xiaoying decided to meet her. He changed his clothes and solemnly tidied up his appearance, as if he was going to an important negotiation. The next time they met, he must leave a good impression on his daughter. This was a father carefully trying to protect his dignity, and at the same time, he wanted to leave a perfect image in front of his beloved daughter. Even if he was prepared for the worst, he also hoped that in the worst-case scenario, he could leave a place in Xianxia's heart. Gong Xiaoying tidied himself up and went out, only to find that 30 minutes had passed. Gong Jie said that Xianxia was in the living room. He walked towards the living room with his walking stick, almost without grace. When he walked into the living room, he didn't find anyone there. Gong Xiaoying looked around, but didn't see anyone. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. 30 minutes had passed. That person had probably already left. She had given him 30 minutes of grace. He wasn't willing to wait for another minute. Gong Xiaoying was a little annoyed with himself for wasting so much time on his appearance. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed that she wasn't around. Gong Xiaoying sighed, turned around and was about to leave. But Xianxia's gentle voice suddenly came from behind him. "Since you're already here, why don't you sit for a while?" Gong Xiaoying's back stiffened. He turned around in surprise and saw Xianxia coming out of the bathroom. She was wiping her hands with a towel while looking at him calmly. Just now, the reason why he didn't see her at first glance was because she went to the bathroom to wash her hands. When she walked out, she saw that he was about to leave. She was a little surprised. "Just now? I didn't see you. I thought you had already left." Facing her like this, he seemed a little embarrassed and nervous, so much so that his words were not as swift and decisive as before. In the past, no matter who he faced, he always had a feeling of superiority. Even when facing her, it was the same. Knowing that she was still alive, when he went to see her, he wanted to give her the dignity and aura of a father. But that was just how people were. It was just that he had lost it once and did not know how to cherish it. Now, he didn't even care about grace. Just speaking carefully in front of her was enough to make her tremble with fear. "Are you not going to sit? I brewed some tea, and it's getting cold now." Xianxia took the lead and sat down on the sofa. She had already brewed a pot of tea on the coffee table. There are many good teas on the island. I've never seen some of them before. Using this topic, Gong Xiaoying broke the deadlock. "Do you like black tea or green tea?" "Whether it's black tea or green tea, I don't refuse any. But compared to green tea, I prefer black tea. Especially in winter, when I brew a cup of Jinjun Mei and Chimen tea, I feel my body warming up." "I like black tea too. I heard from Xiao Jie that you actually like coffee the most." Chapter 4400. Xianxia said, "Like my mother, she loved coffee too. However, at that time, coffee was too expensive, so she would often brew flower tea to drink." "Flower tea?" "Yeah." It was rare for Xianxia to talk about their childhood with Gong Xiaoying. "When I was young, I still remember the place where we lived. It was very small and simple. It was a typical old, run-down and small neighborhood with only one bedroom and one living room. The place wasn't big. A monthly rent of 300 to 100 yuan was very expensive at that time. Although the living room and bedroom were very big, because there were 3 of us, my mother placed a small bed in the living room to train Xiao Jie's independence. My mother and I slept in the bedroom. The kitchen wasn't big and the bathroom was small. When I was young, I could only squeeze in the bathtub with Xiao Jie. When I was young, my health wasn't very good and I often caught colds from the cold. However, although the house was small, the garden that came with it was very big." "Garden?" Xianxia nodded. "Yeah. I remember that when we first moved in, the garden was already abandoned. Although it's called a garden, it's actually just a flower bed surrounded by weeds and withered leaves. Mom was very satisfied when she saw the flower bed. Although 300 yuan is very expensive, she still bought it without hesitation." Gong Xiaoying said, "Your mother liked flowers and plants very much." Yeah, she was especially particular about them. After moving in, she spent a day tidying up the house and another day taking care of the flower bed. Oh, following Xianxia's description, Gong Xiaoying's heart calmed down. He couldn't help but imagine the layout of the house where the three of them rented and that small but warm little garden. My mother was very tired every day. Because she had to take care of us, it was inconvenient for her to go to work at the factory. Moreover, at that time, the Mu family was looking for her everywhere, so she was afraid. Therefore, she hid at home, washing clothes, sewing clothes, and taking care of the children. Sometimes she would take some odd jobs back home. At the mention of Mu Qingqing, many memories flew in Xianxia's mind. Those memories were like a revolving lantern, appearing in her mind scene by scene. Even after so many years, she still couldn't forget Mu Qingqing's voice and appearance. Her every frown and smile made her yearn for her very much. Gong Xiaoying asked, "What kind of odd jobs?" "The kind of assembly of small parts. She gets paid according to the number of parts she made. It cost 50 cents to make one. Every day, her mother would make 100. Although she could make 50 yuan a day, it was really tiring. It's really tiring." When Gong Xiaoying heard this, he frowned slightly and fell into deep thought. 50 yuan. At that time, to him, it was probably just a dessert. However, Mom was very optimistic. She didn't make a fuss, no matter how tired she was. Sometimes, when she couldn't get any work, she would happily go to the back garden to take care of her flowers and plants. But most of the time, she liked to sit by the window and look out. But we really don't know what she's looking at. Later, I found out. She was waiting for someone by the window. She was like a stubborn soldier. Even if she was wounded and exhausted, she still held her sword and held on to the last lonely city. Chapter 44:01. I still remember that the neighborhood was quite messy. At that time, this small district was actually a slum area. There were also many workers who came to Shangjing to work. However, many drug addicts and people with criminal records lived there. When Mom came home from grocery shopping, people would often whistle at her. Every night, she would be afraid and lock the door several times. Sometimes, strangers would knock on the door in the dead of the night. Mom would be so scared that she would hide under the blanket and hug me, trembling. But little Jie is the only one who sleeps soundly every time. Gong Xiaoying listened carefully. He did not expect that Xianxia would be willing to tell him these things. However, these were exactly what he wanted to hear. He especially wanted to know how Mu Qingqing lived during that period of time. She must have had a hard time raising two children. Every time he thought of this, Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. However, what was the use of heartache? She had already passed away. Xianxia said, "I remember that there was a period of time when everyone in the neighborhood was in a state of panic. This was because a murder case was discovered in the neighborhood. A prostitute died in a rented apartment. It was said that she had recruited a customer who was a drug addict. When he entered her apartment, his drug addiction kicked in and he asked her for drugs. She did not do this business at all, so where would she get drugs from? That customer went crazy and killed her cruelly. The corpse was left in the rented apartment and no one cared about it. The prostitute also had a child who was only 3 years old at that time. The police analyzed that after 7 days, the neighbors smelled a stench and called the police. When they came, the woman was lying in the living room and the bedroom door was locked. Every time she did business, the woman would lock the child in a room. After 7 days, no one cared about the child and the child starved to death. These stories were unheard and unimaginable by people at Gong Xiaoying's level. At that time, many people said that the murderer was a psychopathic murderer who was out to take revenge on society, especially on women who lived alone with children. They bullied such people. Before the case was solved, the entire neighborhood was filled with rumors. Mom was especially afraid, so she asked someone to come over and change the windows and doors. It's very hard to raise 2 children alone without a man to take care of them. Gong Xiaoying paused, somewhat puzzled. Didn't your mother think about getting married? Get married? When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but smile as if she was mocking her. You should know mother better than I do. Get married? Yes, she didn't have to worry about marriage. No matter what, her beauty was there. Anyone who liked her, regardless of their status, would be bewitched by her beauty. But then little Jie and I would have a stepfather. She doesn't want us to be wronged. She felt that she would definitely be able to wait for the man in her heart, and that man would definitely not let her down. I didn't let her down. Gong Xiaoying said dejectedly, I thought that she didn't want to go with me, so I was very disappointed. I didn't know that she was under house arrest. After that, she secretly gave birth to you and Xiaojia. I only found out about this later. Yun Shishir's eyes reddened as she asked sadly, but didn't she send you a letter? Why didn't you look for her immediately? Gong Xiaoying was speechless. Chapter 4402. That was a crucial move. She couldn't leave him. He thought that if he dragged it out, there would be no problem. It wouldn't be too late to pick up Mu Qingqing after he was done with the matter at hand. And that business became the cornerstone of the Hurricane Group's future. But, because of a mistake, he lost the love of his life. He had always been confident, but he didn't expect that this decision would be the one he regretted the most in his life. He didn't go. You love the country, but you love the beauty even more. But between the beauty and the country, you chose the country. My mother, on the other hand, died without a status. Yun Shishir said with heartache. Even in her final despair, she was still calling your name. I heard it, but in the end, she didn't see you. Gong Xiaoying's lips trembled violently. Every time he thought of that scene, just imagining it made his heart ache and suffocate. I'm sorry, Gong Xiaoying felt extremely guilty. He couldn't remember how many times he had apologized. Looking at the photo, looking out of the window, looking at the sky, sometimes dreaming of him, or thinking of Mu Qingqing, he would feel guilty and apologize. But he couldn't remember how many times he had apologized. Yun Shishir was indifferent when she heard that. She shook her head gently. I'm not here to blame you. Moreover, you don't have to apologize to me. Fate is sometimes like dominoes. If there's a missing link in the middle, the outcome will be different. It's also because of you that I met my true love and had 3 cute children. But Dad, the person you should feel indebted to is not me, but Mom. Dad, Gong Xiaoying didn't react at first, but he was really sensitive to the word Dad. When he heard this sentence, he was stunned. He raised his head in disbelief and looked at Yun Shishir. She looked at him calmly. There was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. It was relief, calmness, gentleness, and at the same time, a little mockery. I originally thought that I would never say this word to you in this lifetime. She paused and continued, not only did you hurt my mother, but you also hurt Yu and Gong Fan. You even hurt Xiao Yichen. Logically speaking, I shouldn't forgive you. I shouldn't forgive you in this lifetime. Gong Xiaoying gulped. The man who was originally in high spirits was now sitting in front of his daughter, but he did not dare to speak. He was afraid that if he said something wrong, she would be angry again. However, at this moment he had too many doubts in his heart. This was nothing. She called him Daddy. Did this mean that she was willing to acknowledge him as her father? Gong Xiaoying was agitated, uneasy, speculating, and suspicious. There was a hint of caution in his eyes, which made Yun Shishir feel a little sad. Mother must really want me to acknowledge you. Sometimes, in my dreams, I would dream of her. She stood in front of me, smiling, looking at her as if I saw myself. The reason why I have such a deep impression of her appearance is because I really look like her. Perhaps this is also a kind of inheritance. Back then, even in such a difficult environment, she hid for so long. For so long, she questioned whether she should give birth to Xiao Jie and me. It was all for the sake of passing on her life. Even if she's no longer around, she still hopes that Xiao Jie and I can be by your side. Chapter 4403. When Yu returned to Hurricane, I once made a wish in my heart. If he and Gong Fan could be well, I was willing to let go of all the grudges. She did not want to remember these grudges anymore. She was willing to let go of everything. God bless her. In the end, Yu and Gong Fan were safe and sound. Hence, she had to keep her promise. Yun Shishir looked up, pursed her lips, and looked out of the window. Finally, her gaze slowly fell on Gong Xiaoying. She took a deep breath, and then, a gentle smile appeared on her face. Daddy, This one word almost certainly implied that she was willing to acknowledge him as her father. At that moment, Gong Xiaoying's rationality collapsed. He had thought that she would hate him for the rest of her life. But he had never thought that she would be willing to forgive him. Gong Xiaoying covered his face and let the tears wreak havoc in his heart. In an instant he choked up like a child. He was very stingy with his tears. When he heard the news of Mu Qingqing's death, he rarely shed tears. At that time, he was still a little confused about the fact that Mu Qingqing had left him forever. He even vaguely felt that she was not dead and was just hiding from him. However, after a long time, when he looked at her photo at a certain moment, the thought that she was really dead came to him. Finally, he could not take it anymore and cried once. This time, Xianxia had completely let go of her hatred for him. He could not help but cry again. This was one of the few moments of tenderness in his life. An iron-blooded man, an all-powerful man who stood at the top of the world. At this moment, in front of his beloved daughter, he had completely broken down. Xianxia could not help but be moved. She stood up, walked to his side, and gently patted his shoulder. "Dad, don't cry. Xianxia, I'm really sorry." Xianxia kept saying that he did not owe her anything. But did he really not owe her anything? Her words could not convince him at all. He owed her, and he owed her a lot. The sadness in his heart was about to overflow. Xianxia knelt down and tried to wipe his tears away. But no matter how hard she tried, her own tears kept flowing. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As she wiped away his tears, she also wiped away her own tears. "Dad, why are you crying? You're putting me in a difficult position. Are you really willing to acknowledge the Gong family?" Gong Xiaoying was still extremely cautious and careful. He was afraid that her words were just empty words. "What else? I've already said so. Do you still suspect that I'm unwilling to acknowledge the Gong family?" "No." Gong Xiaoying's heart ached as he hugged her tightly. "Sure, let Daddy hug you." This sentence finally broke the last line of defense in Xianxia's heart. She gently snuggled into Gong Xiaoying's arms. At this point, it also meant that the relationship between father and daughter had finally been reunited. Gong Jie stood at the door and pushed it open. He looked at the father and daughter who were hugging each other and choking with sobs. His eyes were filled with bitterness. He bit his lip as he looked at this scene, but he felt extremely gratified. He had a family again. Memories flew. It was as if the scenes from his childhood had appeared before his eyes. In the rented apartment, Mu Qingqing was meticulously preparing the hot pot. Chapter 4404. He and Xianxia ran back to the kitchen and lay on the kitchen counter, drooling over the fresh beef. Mu Qingqing would urge them to wash their hands as she continued to prepare dinner with a smile. When the hot pot was ready and served to the table, the two little guys gobbled up the hot pot. They were not afraid of being scalded at all. As Mu Qingqing ate, she would suddenly stare at the empty table in a daze. The table in the rental house was a typical square table with the two little guys sitting on each side. Naturally, one side of the table would be empty. Mu Qingqing would often stand up, take out a set of cutlery, and place it on the table as if she had completed some kind of pious ritual. She had always wanted to have a family. The family she wanted was not a luxurious one. She only wanted a family of a few people, healthy and safe. Sometimes, Xianxia would lie on the windowsill with her and stare in a certain direction without moving. She knew that her mother was waiting for someone. A man. And she knew that this man was her and Xiao Jie's father. But no matter how much she waited and hoped, she could not find him. Sometimes, Xianxia would accompany her mother and wait by the window. Gradually, she would get sleepy and lie on her arm with her eyes closed, half asleep. In a daze, she saw her mother suddenly run out. Through the yellow afternoon window, she saw her mother throw herself into the arms of a man without a care for her own safety. The man was very tall with a pair of straight legs. He was dressed in a suit and leather shoes. His every movement gave people a sense of security. This was something that Xianxia, who had been living a homeless life, had never dreamed of. She tried hard to raise her head to see the man's face, but just as she raised her head, she woke up. At that time, she was looking out of the window in a daze. She did not realize that the scene just now was just her hallucination. She could not help but feel a little disappointed. She turned around and saw that her mother was still sitting beside her. She held her chin and looked out of the window as if she could not get tired of looking. Xianxia raised her head and looked at her mother. She pouted and said sadly, "I had a dream just now." Dream? I dreamt of a man standing outside the door. Then you pounced on him and the two of you hugged each other. She would never forget the look on her mother's face when she heard those words. She stared at her in astonishment, tears welling up in her widened eyes. Her heart ached so much that she pulled Xianxia into her arms. Suddenly, she broke down and felt so sad that it was as if there was a fishbone stuck in her throat. "Mom, is the person you're waiting for Dad?" Xianxia asked curiously, "When is he coming to pick us up?" Hearing this, Mu Qingqing couldn't hold back her tears. At that time, she vaguely realized it. This man, perhaps she would never be able to wait for him in this lifetime? All this time, she had deliberately ignored and never considered this problem. Now, it was once again placed in front of her. Would she never be able to wait for him? "I can't wait any longer," Mu Qingqing muttered to herself. She seemed to be comforting her, but at the same time, she seemed to be convincing herself. "I can't wait any longer. Mommy doesn't want to wait any longer." However, his prophecy came true. She really didn't get to see him. Gong Jie leaned against the door. Suddenly, his heart palpitated violently. Mother. He could not bear to recall every frown, every smile, every voice and every face. Chapter 4405. And he did not want to recall Mu Qingqing. Because once he recalled, once he really missed her, he would realize that there were some things in the past that he really could not go back to. Some people would never be there. He had been hypnotizing himself, deliberately not recalling the bits and pieces of the past. Until now, when he saw Gong Xiaoying and Xianxia hugging each other and reconciling, he realized that the father and daughter had finally recognized each other. If his mother was still around, she would be greatly relieved to see this scene. However, if his mother was still around, Xianxia would not have waited until now to reconcile with his father. Xianxia had never minded the hurt that Gong Xiaoying had caused her. She understood that no one could doubt Gong Xiaoying's feelings for her. However, she could not forgive him because this man had made her mother wait for a lifetime. Gong Xiaoying also never dared to recall. Just like that, more than 20 years passed. In these 20 years, women had appeared by his side, but gradually, he realized that he did not need women anymore. Some people's positions were really irreplaceable. Gong Jie could not stand it anymore. Affected by such an atmosphere, he looked a little lost. He silently turned around and walked down the stairs as if he had lost all his strength. On the way back to the room, Hua Jin and Gong Jie bumped into each other. "Hey, Gong Jie." However, halfway through his words, Hua Jin paused and did not speak again. He was shocked to find that there was a clear tear stain on Gong Jie's face. No matter how hard Gong Jie tried to hold it in, he could not stop his sad tears. Gong Xiaoying had been waiting for Xianxia's forgiveness, but he did not have any expectations. Just like how Mu Qingqing did not have any expectations when she waited for him. However, more than 20 years later, Xianxia finally forgave Gong Xiaoying. Her forgiveness also seemed to mean that Mu Qingqing had forgiven Gong Xiaoying. He finally realized that his mother had finally met the man in her heart that she had been thinking about all this time. For so many years, he had always had a vague feeling. That was, his mother was clearly still by his side and had not gone far away. Sometimes, in his dreams, he could still clearly see his mother's voice and face. Perhaps he did not realize it in his heart, but he actually hated Gong Xiaoying. Now, he should really let go of all this. What's wrong? Hua Jin was a little surprised by Gong Jie's soullessness and walked over. When Gong Jie saw him, he did not say a word as he gently clasped his hand on his shoulder. "Don't move. What are you doing?" "Lean." Gong Jie leaned his head weakly on Hua Jin's shoulder. His weight, almost all of his body's was almost all. His to be, he chooses. At night, Gong Xiaoying was sleeping on the bed when he suddenly felt a little inexplicably uneasy. In a trance, he was half awake and half asleep. Although his mind was very clear, his consciousness had already entered the dream. In the dream, he clearly saw that he was standing in a very dilapidated neighborhood. This was a very backward residential area. Chapter 4406. Gong Xiaoying slowly walked around the neighborhood aimlessly. The sound of children playing could be heard from the neighborhood. It seemed to be noon. He could vaguely hear the sound of cooking through the open windows of some houses. Soon after, someone called the playful children home for lunch. Beneath his feet was a newly poured cement road. This road seemed to have been an ordinary mud road before, but after the city's construction, it was transformed into a cement road. However, it seemed to have been modified bit by bit. As a result, the road had a patch-like feel. Piece by piece, it gave a very shabby feeling. Suddenly, he walked to a residential area and stopped in his tracks. From his point of view, he could see a courtyard. It was a small courtyard, but it was neatly maintained. Green grass, wisteria, and beautiful Chinese roses decorated the originally dilapidated courtyard. He could not help but be attracted by the courtyard. He slowly walked a few steps closer, but he was unexpectedly bumped into by a few naughty children. The group of children obviously did not notice him, a foreigner, and did not have time to greet him. They chased after him and ran away. "Xiaojia, wait for me," a voice attracted his attention. He turned around and saw a delicate and pretty little girl running past him in a huff. In front of her, a little boy who was about her height was waiting for her. "Hurry up. You're running so fast. How can I keep up?" "You're running too slow. We just finished eating. Don't run so fast." Hand in hand, the two boys ran off again. Gong Xiaoying's gaze was deeply attracted by the two children. He watched as they ran further and further away. Then, he chased after them a few steps closer. "Run slower." He heard a woman worriedly calling out to them. The voice came from the window in front. He carefully went from the backyard to the front. For the residents of this neighborhood, the courtyard facing south was the main entrance, and the back was the back door. There was an open window at the back door. A woman was sitting by the bed, holding her chin as she watched the two children run further and further away. Helpless, she sat down by the window. From his angle, he finally saw clearly, it was her, the person who had waited for him all his life, the person he had missed all his life. "Ching-ching," Gong Xiaoying felt his voice tremble. His voice was so low that the woman obviously did not notice him. Instead, she looked in another direction, not knowing what she was waiting for. Perhaps, others would never be able to understand what it felt like for her to just wait by the window. What was it like to use all your strength to wait for someone? Uneasiness, fear, struggle, all kinds of emotions were mixed up. Gong Xiaoying could not help but mutter, "Ching-ching." He walked towards the window. It wasn't until he got closer and closer that the girl in the window inadvertently glanced over and caught sight of him. Her eyes were fiercely startled. She saw him. Gong Xiaoying stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. He pursed his lips, but he could not hold back his tears any longer. After brewing in his throat for a while, he finally spat out a mouthful of turbid air. His eyes were red as he looked at her. His heart was filled with longing. "It's me," he spoke in a hoarse voice. The woman stood up abruptly and pushed open the window. Chapter 4407. They were not far apart, so he could see the expression on her face. Surprise, shock, panic. Mu Qingqing covered her mouth, but she did not have the same self-control as him. Tears kept rolling down her cheeks. Xiaoying. Perhaps Mu Qingqing didn't expect that she would be able to see him again in this lifetime. She hurriedly pushed open the door and walked towards him. However, when she got closer, she immediately stopped in her tracks and maintained a distance of 3 meters from him. She didn't dare to take a closer look. The two of them faced each other, and there was a feeling of homesickness. She was afraid. When she got closer, she recognized him, but it was not him. He was also afraid. When he got closer to her and hugged her, it was all a dream. Mu Qingqing's eyes were already blurred by tears. Is it you?" she carefully confirmed. She was not sure if the man who suddenly appeared in front of her was the man she had been waiting for. Gong Xiaoying smiled helplessly. The corners of his lips curled up as his brows furrowed tightly. He took a deep breath and choked with sadness. Qingqing, it's me. Xiaoying, is it really you? Mu Qingqing tried to take a few steps closer to him. She looked at him carefully until she was sure that the man standing in front of her was the man she had been thinking about and waiting for. She could no longer suppress her emotions and completely broke down. You're here. You're finally here. She had waited for so long. Mu Qingqing sadly threw herself into his arms and asked hoarsely, "Why are you only here now? I've waited for so long. Why are you only here now?" Mu Qingqing nestled in his arms. Her tears could not help but wet his lapel. Gong Xiaoying carefully hugged her, afraid that he would hurt her if he hugged her too tightly. Or perhaps he was afraid that this was just a long dream. If he hugged her too tightly, the person in his arms would turn into ashes when he woke up. Mu Qingqing hugged him tightly, and he hugged her tightly as well. Even if it was just a simple hug, they had waited for more than 20 years. Mu Qingqing sadly said, "I thought I would never be able to wait for you again." She used the last of her strength to force the words out of her mouth. "I thought I would never see you again in this lifetime. How could that be? Idiot, aren't I here now?" Gong Xiaoying hugged her tightly. "Qingqing, don't be afraid. I'm here to take you home." Her whole life, she had been drifting around helplessly, with no one to depend on. Just like migratory birds, they would never have a harbor to rest in. Hearing his words, Mu Qingqing was overjoyed. "Really? Will we have a home?" "Yes. This family has me, you, little Jie, and Xianxia." Gong Xiaoying looked at her and sobbed even harder. "Let's never be separated again, okay?" He held her face in his hands and scanned her features inch by inch. He desperately wanted to take a few more glances at her. She was still as beautiful as before. She had jet black hair and mesmerizing eyes. They were watery and lively, as if they were carrying thousands of stars. She stared at him as if he was the only one in her eyes. How could she not want to take a few more glances at him? Gently holding his face, Mu Qingqing tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss his forehead. "Xiaoying, I don't regret." She did not regret waiting for him for so long. Chapter 44:08. Xiaoying, Mu Qingqing stood on her tiptoes and gently kissed his forehead, the tip of his nose, and the edge of his lips. Finally, a soft kiss landed on his lips. Gong Xiaoying was immersed in the bliss of this kiss. He closed his eyes and his eyelashes trembled violently. Was this a dream? Vaguely, there seemed to be a voice that was asking him silently. "Qingqing, am I dreaming?" "Dream?" Mu Qingqing laughed. "How could it be a dream? I'm still worried and scared. Is this a dream?" "Qingqing," Gong Xiaoying finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He buried his face in her neck and couldn't control his tears anymore. "I miss you so much." These 4 words couldn't express how much he missed her. He seemed to recall the first time they met. She was beautiful and moving. She looked back and smiled, and he fell in love at first sight. When they were swimming in the lake, he hugged her and kissed her ear, telling her how much he loved her. She wasn't the only woman he had. However, there were many women who passed through his life, but she was the only one who left such a deep impression. "I miss you so much." Gong Xiaoying's tears fell and burned her skin. He really missed her. Every time he woke up from a dream in the middle of the night, he felt as if he was suffocating when he thought that he would never be able to hold her in his arms again. He had also been young once, and he had also made a solemn vow of undying love with her. However, he made her wait for so long. In the end, she didn't see him. "Xiaoying, I miss you too." Mu Qingqing held his face and gently kissed his lips. However, he gradually realized that there was an empty space in his arms. He opened his eyes and saw that Mu Qingqing's body was gradually becoming transparent. "Qingqing." He suddenly panicked and reached out to grab her hand. However, the moment he reached out, his hand passed through her body. It was as if countless petals gathered together and were blown away by the wind. Mu Qingqing's gentle smile was gradually buried by the petals. Finally, it was blown away by the wind. Gong Xiaoying abruptly sat up on the bed. Only then did he realize that everything he had just seen was actually a dream. In his dream, he saw her. It was as if he had returned to the place where she had been waiting for him. She was still standing guard there. However, the ending was different from reality. He had found her, and she had waited for him. The regrets of this life seemed to have come to an end because of this. Was it really just a dream? Or perhaps she had never left. It was as if the two of them had fulfilled their long-cherished wish through this dream. Gong Xiaoying's eyes became a little blurred. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside the window, the horizon in the distance was gradually turning bright. He believed it. Mu Qingqing didn't leave. As long as his longing for her remained, this longing would bring him to the end of the other realm, to the place where she was. And she would rely on his longing for her to return to the dream and meet him again. Love would convey each other's beliefs to the other side. Please remember me. Although goodbye must be said. Please remember me. Tears don't fall, though I must go far away from you. You live in my heart. In every night of separation I sing a song for you. Please remember me. Although I must go far away, please remember me. When I hear the sadness of the guitar, this is the only proof that I am with you until I hug you again. Chapter 4409. Gong Jie vaguely felt that someone was sitting by the window. He forced his eyes open and saw a familiar figure sitting by his bed. It was a woman. Gong Jie furrowed his brows as a hand seemed to be gently placed on his forehead. You're awake. What's wrong? Do you have a headache? Mu Qingqing's gentle voice rang in his ears. Was it his mother? Gong Jie suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He leaned over and subconsciously hugged her waist. Mom, slap, slap, slap. The hand that was originally on his forehead began to gently pat his face. A voice filled with disdain sounded in front of him. Wake up, wake up. Gong Jie finally woke up and opened his eyes wide. At this moment, a beam of sunlight shone in from the window. He realized that the sky had cleared up. The sun was high in the sky and it was shining brightly. Under the bright sunlight, he finally saw the person in front of him clearly. Hua Jin stared at him speechlessly. Gong Jie suddenly sat up from the bed and grabbed him by the collar. What are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Why are you glaring at me so fiercely? Hua Jin looked aggrieved. I worked so hard to take care of you for the whole night. You? Take care of me? Gong Jie expressed his doubts. What about me? Hua Jin sized him up and asked tentatively, What do you mean? Have you forgotten what happened last night? What happened last night? Gong Jie frowned and looked at Hua Jin. He suddenly said something that almost made Hua Jin choke to death. Did we sleep together? Could it be that he mistook Hua Jin for a woman and something happened? Although he was drunk and did not recognize anyone, he had to admit that Hua Jin was indeed more beautiful than a woman. However, he was not the kind of man who would mess around after drinking. Hua Jin's face immediately turned red. Are you out of your mind? Gong Jie snorted. Then tell me what happened last night. Yesterday you were drunk. I was afraid that you would vomit in the middle of the night, so I stayed by your bedside and didn't sleep the whole night. Vomit? I remember there was a man on the news who got drunk. He was so drunk that he vomited all over his body. However, because he didn't clean up the vomit in his mouth in time, it went back into his trachea and he eventually suffocated. If you died because you were drunk, wouldn't that be a pity? Gong Jie's expression turned even uglier. Could it be that in his heart he was that inferior? When Hua Jin saw his cold face, he was instantly annoyed. Heh, you really have no conscience. He stood up angrily. Just as he was about to turn around, Gong Jie took a deep breath and gently held his forehead. Because he drank a little wine last night, he had a hangover and had a bad headache. He furrowed his brows and said helplessly, Sorry, I mistook you for my mother just now. Your mother? When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately turned around and sat by the bed. He asked curiously, Is your mother called Mu Qingqing? Last night when you were drunk, you kept calling out Mom. Are you thinking of your mother? Xianxia and her father have also acknowledged each other. This is probably your mother's wish. Chapter 4410. Gong Jie smiled all of a sudden. She's not dead. Not dead? Yes. Gong Jie turned around, opened the drawer, and took out a photo frame. In the photo, a woman was sitting on a flower bed. It was a photo taken casually. There were not many photos of Mu Qingqing when she was alive. Gong Jie had put in a lot of effort, but many of Mu Qingqing's photos were lost one after another when they moved or when they were dealing with her funeral. This was his best preserved photo. Gong Jie looked at the photo with a gentle gaze that he had never seen before. She's always lived in my heart. He had never forgotten. He believed that death was not the main point of life. Forgetting was. The candle of life would not be extinguished easily. The connection between people was their memories. He had always remembered her and carefully kept her in his heart, never forgetting her. He also firmly believed that as long as her memories were still there, she would not disappear. He also believed that once a person lost their life, their soul would go to another world. Although that world did not have a warm body, it had everything that this world did not have. Hua Jin smiled when he heard that. I also believe that as long as your memories are still there, she will always live in your heart. Are you in a hurry to go back? Aren't you going to stay for a few more days? After staying on the island for a few days, Yun Shirshir mentioned that she wanted to go back home. On the tarmac, the private jet had been waiting for a long time. Gong Xiaoying, however, was reluctant to part with her. He repeatedly urged her to stay, hoping that she could stay on the island for a few more days. Dad, I didn't go back with Yajia because I wanted to bury the hatchet between us. Now that we've acknowledged each other, it's time for me to go back. However, Xiao Yichen and Yu will stay for a few more days. Hua Jin and Natalia will have to stay on the island for a while longer. Alice refused to let Natalia leave. She said that Yu needed a long period of observation after a few days, so she could not go back with Yun Shirshir immediately. Thus, she could only return alone. Gong Xiaoying held his beloved daughter's hand, but he was reluctant to let go. He couldn't bear to let her go. Yun Shirshir smiled and said, "It's not like we'll never see each other again. Anyway, since you've handed over Hurricane's affairs to Xiao Jie, you can come to our place to stay for a few days when you're free." However, Gong Xiaoying had his own concerns. "Shirshir, do you think he will accept me?" Yun Shirshir was stunned. She knew that Gong Xiaoying was worried that Mu Yajia would not accept him. "Dad, do you still hate the Mu family?" Gong Xiaoying's gaze turned complicated. He sighed and said helplessly, "Hate is just a term used by incompetent people. Rather than hating the Mu family, I might as well hate myself more." However, he used to be so proud. How could he be willing to face his own mistakes? However, at that moment he had thought things through. It was impossible to say that he did not hate the Mu family. However, he did not hate Mu Yajia as much as before. "You and he are the two most important men in my life. Since I've decided to accept you and not hate you anymore, then he will naturally let me do as I wish. He won't hate you, so don't worry." Only then did Gong Xiaoying relax a little. "I'll tell him that I'm sorry the next time we meet. He had hurt you and Xiao Yichen." This was his apology to Mu Yajia. Chapter 44:11. Yun Shirshir was surprised that a man with such a high status like Gong Xiaoying would take the initiative to apologize to a junior like Mu Yajia. Gong Jie stepped forward and said to Gong Xiaoying, "Dad, it's getting late. Let's sister go back early." Gong Xiaoying also nodded and watched Yun Shirshir board the plane. The group of people waited until the plane broke through the clouds and left the tarmac. Yun Shirshir returned to the country, leaving Hua Jin and the three little guys behind. Natalia's situation was not optimistic. Hua Jin was worried every day and night. Yu's condition was stabilizing, so Alice and Romanka focused more on Natalia. During the few days when Natalia was in the lab, Hua Jin and Gong Jie would accompany and protect her. Romanka and Alice discussed whether they should use Yu's treatment plan on Natalia and combine the two personalities into one. Alice was a little hesitant. Everyone's situation was different. Just like the same illness, the same treatment plan, but the results might be different for everyone. For example, taking medicine. Some people could use penicillin treatment without restraint, but some people were allergic to penicillin and could not use such medicine. Alice was worried about exactly what Romanka was worried about. He was also worried that Yu's treatment plan would not work on Natalia. Therefore, he proposed to bring Natalia back to his lab and work with other authoritative experts in this field to develop a treatment plan suitable for Alice. Alice agreed. When Alice wanted to take Natalia away, Hua Jin was naturally worried and wanted to go with them. He asked for Gong Jie's opinion, and Gong Jie agreed. After packing their luggage and setting the flight route, Alice and Romanka boarded the plane together with Hua Jin and Natalia on a sunny day. Alice and Gong Jie agreed that they would contact him as soon as they arrived at their destination. However, a day and a night passed, and Gong Jie did not receive a call from Alice. He sent a video call to Hua Jin, but there was no response for a long time. He thought that the group was too tired from the trip and went to bed early after arriving at their destination, so he did not pay much attention. However, on the second day and the third day, Gong Jie still did not receive a call from Alice. He could not sit still anymore and contacted the person in charge of Romanka's private lab. However, he was told that Romanka and Alice did not return to the lab. This time, he could no longer keep his calm. Just like that, the group of 4 disappeared without a trace. He sent someone to investigate the flight that Alice and Romanka were on. After the investigation, his subordinate came back and told him that the flight had changed its route midway, but the flight route had been cut off. Generally speaking, the flight route would be reported back to the headquarters during the flight. However, the plane carrying the 4 of them lost contact halfway through the journey. Some of his subordinates speculated that the plane might have been hijacked by terrorists and lost contact with them. Gong Jie could no longer keep his calm. This plane was under his private name, and the body of the plane had a particularly eye-catching logo of the Hurricane Group. Usually, when he went out, what he was most afraid of was not the weather suddenly worsening, but the terrorists who were waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 44:12. The flight route from Dark Wind Island to the research lab where Romanka was located was very long. They needed to stop midway before continuing their flight. The stopover was about 5 hours long. However, even if they stopped for 5 hours, they should have arrived at their destination long ago. Unless there was an accident. Some people analyzed and suspected that terrorists had already found out the flight route of the plane. Moreover, they might have hijacked the plane when it stopped midway. Hijacking? They did not rule out that possibility. However, who could have hijacked the plane? There were too many possibilities. Hurricane Group had many enemies, especially in the Nanzhou and Zhongdong regions. There were many organizations that hated Hurricane Group. Guessing based on this alone was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. Gong Jie was a little annoyed. Choosing to let them take the Hurricane Group's private jet was probably his biggest mistake. If they had really been hijacked, Gong Jie was 100% sure that these people must have come for him. However, there were no results at the moment. Therefore, these could only be categorized as guesses and could not be confirmed. However, as the investigation deepened, they basically ruled out the possibility of a plane crash or an air accident. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen were on Dark Wind Island. They originally planned to return to China in a few days. However, something happened to Hua Jin and Alice, so their plan to return to China was temporarily put on hold. Someone was targeting Hurricane Group. There was no news for a few days. The people sent to investigate always returned empty-handed. Even if they had really been hijacked, they should have stated their conditions. Even if they had encountered extreme terrorists and perished together, they should at least want to see the person if he was alive, and the corpse if he was dead. There was no news at all. There was really no news at all. If they did not explode in silence, they would perish in silence. For a few days, Gong Jie's mood was very low. He did not know whether Alice and the others were safe or not. However, Yu Yu repeatedly comforted him that no news was the best news. However, Gong Jie did not think so. He had never been hijacked. There were countless terrorists eyeing him, but every time he went out, Hurricane would go up and down, eyeing him covetously. The mercenary group he sent out was enough to annihilate a medium-sized armed organization. No matter how many people had their eyes on him, it would be difficult for him to break through. However, there were many side branches of the Gong family who had encountered terrifying kidnappings. The hurricane grew stronger day by day. At the same time, walking on the edge was like walking on thin ice. Every step was frightening. He remembered that when Gong Jie was not yet 18 years old, he had heard of something. Ever since he was young, one of his older brothers who had always bullied him in the Gong family was kidnapped. Rumor had it that she was abducted by a group of anti-Japanese martial artists. Following that, she was placed under house arrest for 3 months. It was said that in order to prevent him from escaping, the martial artists directly cut off the tendons in his arms and legs. In the end, Hurricane paid a hefty price to redeem him, but when he came back, he was no different from a cripple. A ransom of 50 million was just a small sum to Hurricane. The reason why he generously offered 50 million was to protect the dignity of the Hurricanes. In the end, these militants did not end up well. They dared to go against the Hurricanes, but in the end, they suffered a double loss and were ruthlessly oppressed by the Hurricanes. However, the life of the person who was kidnapped was ruined. Chapter 44:13. Originally, a high-spirited young man, after experiencing an inhumane kidnapping, returned to Hurricane, but he was depressed. In the end, his wound became infected and worsened. In the end, he died young. After experiencing this incident, Gong Jie deeply understood that in this world, the strong preyed on the weak. It was easy to go up the mountain but difficult to go down. When a person finally reached the peak and stood there for a long time, as the saying goes, it is lonely at the top. Wanting to come down again is no longer a simple matter. As the son of Hurricane, from the moment he returned to the Gong family, he was destined to have an extraordinary life. At the same time, he also shouldered a responsibility that was 100 times more difficult than that of ordinary people. Once you entered this cruel world, it would be impossible for you to escape. Then he could only become stronger. Gong Jie had always been careful to protect the safety of his family. Every time he returned to China, he would be extremely careful whenever he met with Xianxia. What he was afraid of was that those who were secretly watching him would shift their attention to Xianxia. His sister was already married and had a family. She was no longer alone. In addition to her beloved husband, she also had 3 lovely children. He acted cautiously in everything he did, lest he bring her unexpected disaster. Hurricane was the world's arms factory. In addition to the heads of state, the government, anti-government militants, and extreme terrorists, there were all kinds of people who dealt with it. Dealing with killing must be accompanied by killing. Therefore, as the successor of the Hurricane Group, Gong Jie had long been used to the world of open and covert attacks. A moment ago, the president who signed an agreement with him and shook hands with him on friendly terms might go to the International Court of Justice to propose an express restriction on Hurricane in the next second. A moment ago, the terrorists who were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at Hurricane and threatening to bomb the headquarters of Hurricane, the next second, they stood in front of him with a flattering face, groveling and raising their orders. In this world, there were no eternal friends, only eternal interests. The world was bustling and I came for the interests. The world was bustling and I went for the interests. Gong Jie was worried that Hua Jin, Alice, and the others were probably targeted by the terrorists. This was still a relatively ideal suspicion. If they fell into the hands of the extremists, then the consequences would be unimaginable. Could it be someone from the Temple of Light? Gong Xiaoying and Gong Jie were sitting in the study. Both of them were at a loss of what to do. In the midst of the silence, Gong Xiaoying suddenly raised a suspicion. Gong Jie's eyelids twitched when he heard this. The Sacred Palace sect was a small sect when it was first established. Later on, it became a cult. It had been 20 years since its establishment. At first, it was just an ordinary independent religious group, but after Jim came to power, it slowly began to change. Until now, the Temple of Light had more than 5,000 devout followers. One of the main beliefs of the Temple of Light was the so-called Doomsday belief. The program continued to promote that in the future, the whole world would face a catastrophe, and only those who joined his sect would be spared. The sacred church asserted that the signs of the end of the world were everywhere, such as the destruction of the ozone layer, the spread of AIDS, the outbreak of global racial conflicts, and so on. Only by joining the Temple of Light could one escape the calamity of the apocalypse, because the Temple of Light could provide the believers with the necessary supernatural abilities. Chapter 44:14. As the leader, Jim's main responsibility was to protect the believers and send them to the Holy Land, Sirius. In ancient Greek and Roman mythology, Sirius was the star where the gods gathered and had boundless magical power. Didn't the leader of the Sacred Hall, Jim, try to sign an order with you some time ago? Gong Xiaoying sized up Gong Jie and was puzzled. But you didn't satisfy him. The so-called Sacred Hall is actually a fake religion under the name of Christianity. It's an evil sect. Gong Jie furrowed his brows. Besides, guess what he said in the email? He wanted to sign an order worth tens of millions of USD to resist the restrictions of the International Federation. But he couldn't pay tens of millions of USD. What did he say in the email? He said he wanted to give me his son and daughter and his woman. Gong Jie said coldly. He said he was the son and daughter of the Holy Child and had boundless magical power. And his woman was only one of his many mistresses. He said he was the incarnation of God and she was God's woman. Gong Xiaoying heard and couldn't help but snort. I don't know if he's really crazy or just pretending to be crazy. Gong Xiaoying was a little suspicious. I heard that you humiliated him in your reply to his email. Gong Jie didn't say anything and just kept silent. How did you humiliate him? Gong Jie said. I forgot. In other words, you humiliated Jim. That's the truth. Yeah, then you angered him because of that. Gong Jie's face became gloomier. He didn't dare to imagine that it was really someone from the Sacred Hall. If it was true, then he couldn't sit still anymore. Gong Xiaoying said, I've already warned you. Stop people like the Sacred Hall if you can avoid them. Even if you're at a disadvantage, don't fight them head-on. They're barefooted and aren't afraid of anything. When they go crazy, they'll ignore everything. But I can't sign this order with him. Gong Jie didn't think he did anything wrong. If they get their hands on the arms worth tens of millions of dollars, who knows how crazy they will be. But you shouldn't have humiliated him like that. Gong Xiaoying went straight to the point again. You clearly know that there's something wrong with their brains. People like Jim would even think that he's a god and that his deal with you is a gift to you. If you reject him, you're going against God's will. He'll definitely teach you a lesson. Is the Sacred Hall sect so arrogant? Gong Xiaoying curled his lips coldly. What you know about the divine Sacred Hall is superficial. Do you know that the development of the Sacred Hall sect came from the remnants of the Sacred Hall sect? These were all brainless people. Those who were afraid of hurricanes were all clear-headed. However, why would these brainless people be afraid of hurricanes? Perhaps in their eyes, hurricane is just a vassal. The remnants of the Sacred Hall sect. The Sacred Hall sect is the evil cult that developed with the old Jinshan but was destroyed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation because of the bombing of the American International Federation's government building. I see. Gong Jie narrowed his eyes. His thoughts gradually fell into a deadlock. If it was really done by the Sacred Hall sect, then he didn't dare to make a rash judgment. Chapter 44:15. Gong Xiaoying looked serious. If you can protect Alice, then protect her. After all, she is a senior member of Hurricane. Don't force her. Gong Jie's face turned even colder. He suddenly stood up, turned around, and looked at Gong Xiaoying. Hua Jin, Alice, Natalia. Not one less. Gong Jie turned around and left the office. Kira, send me all the information about the sanctuary. Gong Jie ordered to investigate all the information about the sanctuary. Yu Yu's face turned pale when he heard that it might be the sanctuary that did it. He knew a lot about the sanctuary. Uncle, do you know about the dark web? Gong Jie was surprised that Yu mentioned the dark web to him. I know a little. The dark web was something that very few people who lived in peaceful countries could come into contact with during peaceful times. However, the dark web was very famous. There was a rumor that an international student from an American university was kidnapped. It was said that the murderer had already noticed the victim from the beginning and was lurking around her. However, no one knew whether the victim was dead or alive, or where she was now. Some people guessed that the victim might have been moved to an unknown place by the murderer. She might have died, or she might have suffered a fate worse than death. Do you know how those videos on the dark web came to be? What are you trying to say? Yu frowned and said with a serious expression, there are many videos on the dark web about mutilation, killing, and all kinds of inhumane renti experiments. They all came from the sanctuary. Actually, this matter is not known to outsiders. I only learned about this because I intercepted a private email from the sanctuary's leader. Hiss! The man could not help sucking in a breath of cold air. Hua Jin, his first thought was Hua Jin's safety. Even Gong Jie did not realize that at such a critical moment, he was more concerned about Hua Jin's safety than about Natalia. Yu said, if it's really the Temple of Light, then it'll be troublesome. However, I think that if it is really the Sacred Palace sect, they will not do anything to Hua Jin and the others. Perhaps, they will use Hua Jin and the others as hostages to restrain Hurricane and fulfill some of their conditions. Their condition should be the $50 million military order. The Jim Church can't take out that much money at all. They want to gain something without risking anything, so they came up with this idea. But I'm sure that regardless of whether you take out the 50 million order or not, Hua Jin and Alice won't survive. Even if you really take out $50 million worth of munitions, they won't let Hua Jin go. Gong Jie felt a chill in his heart. Chapter 44:16. Gong Jie felt a little helpless. Facing the cult, he had no idea what they would do. He said, the sacred shrine is sinister and cunning. I didn't expect them to do this. But no matter what, if it's really the sacred shrine, then even if there's only a 1 in a million chance, I won't give up on anyone. Yu also agreed. Just as everyone was panicking, Hurricane suddenly received an email. There were a few photos attached to the email, and it was also a threatening letter. However, it also confirmed Gong Xiaoying's terrifying guess. An account with the name Divine Shrine Sect sent an email. There were a total of 5 photos. 4 of them were photos of Alice, Natalia, Hua Jin, and Romenka. They were tied to chairs with black hoods over their heads. Alice, in particular, was covered in wounds and bruises. Hua Jin, on the other hand, was in no better shape. Although Natalia was a child, she wasn't treated well because she was a child. She was also covered in wounds. There was another photo that Gong Jie was shocked when he saw it. In the photo, the 4 of them had their hoods removed and were kneeling on the ground. In front of them were the decapitated bodies of the crew members. It was a very intimidating photo. Glorious decapitation. The sacred shrine had done a lot of dirty things. Their usual method was to imitate extremist terrorist organizations and use decapitation to intimidate their followers. In the sacred shrine, the church set up free cafeterias, daycare centers, elderly clinics, and other social services. The followers of the sacred shrine were people who felt hopeless in life and couldn't get help from society. They were drug addicts, elderly, and lonely people. They were dissatisfied with the reality of society and felt that their future was bleak. They were terrified of nuclear war. Many of them were influenced by nihilism and thought that life was impermanent and that living was a kind of pain. Therefore, after they joined the church, they often talked about suicide. The leader of the sacred shrine even organized a mass suicide drill in Guyana. However, some followers were influenced by the ugly methods of the church, especially when they learned that leader Jim stole followers' property, faked miracles, severely punished followers, and called himself the new savior. Therefore, some followers wanted to leave the organization and secretly escape. Running away from the church was considered a betrayal. Anyone who betrayed the church, once discovered, would face a glorious execution. The Divine Palace believed that only with a complete body could one ascend to heaven after death. However, once a follower was beheaded, they would only have the fate of going to hell. The church would even behead these traitors in front of thousands of believers to serve as a warning to others and serve as a deterrent. This tactic was extremely intimidating, and the church had tried it many times. Gong Jie realized that all the crew members had been beheaded. It was obvious that Natalia was not in a good mental state. At such a young age, she had witnessed such a cruel scene with her own eyes. She must have suffered quite a shock. But looking at Alice and Hua Jin, it was clear that they were still calm. Only Romenka was on the verge of collapse. Alice had seen this kind of scene many times, and Hua Jin deeply understood that fear, uneasiness, and fear could not change one's fate. Instead, these emotions would only make one feel isolated and helpless. Comparatively speaking, it was better to remain calm. Chapter 44:17. However, Romenka was quite shocked, and his mental state was not good. Sacred Shrine Sect. Yu looked at the photos attached to the email and slammed the screen. It's really the Sacred Shrine sect. Gong Jie was annoyed and humiliated to the bone. These damned evil cults. This email was clearly a provocation to him. Other than the photos, the email also stated that if he wanted to redeem the 4 hostages, he would have to continue the unfinished agreement between the 2 parties. Just as Yu expected, this Jim was ambitious. He really wanted to get something for nothing. In the email, the church stated that they would give Hurricane half a month to prepare the contents of the order. Within half a month, if they did not prepare the contents of the order, they would immediately execute the 4 hostages. Jim was so smart that he was sure that among the 4 people he kidnapped, there must be someone Gong Jie cared about the most. Tens of millions of dollars was not worth mentioning to Hurricane. However, these hostages were worth far more than tens of millions of dollars. Gong Jie gritted his teeth in hatred. He knew that with his identity, he would face such threats every day when he was not around. The Sacred Shrine sect was the biggest tumor that Hurricane had to face. Hurricane had offended the Sacred Shrine sect before. In the beginning, Gong Jie was not willing to sign the order with the Sacred Shrine sect because the Sacred Shrine sect was an anti-world and anti-human evil cult. If the Sacred Shrine sect really got the order of tens of millions, it would be a disaster for the whole world. At that time, as Hurricane, they would be in a difficult position. Therefore, Gong Jie decisively refused and was prepared to fight against the Sacred Shrine sect to the end. He thought that when the time came, he would use the International Federation's anti-evil cult authority and the United Nations deployment to eradicate the Sacred Shrine sect. However, he did not expect the Sacred Shrine sect to make the first move. Gong Jie ordered, "Immediately forward this email to the International Federation. Send it secretly." He planned to use this to cooperate with the International Federation. Hurricane had always been against the International Federation. Gong Jie was even at the top of the International Federation's wanted list. However, as the saying went, there were no eternal friends and no eternal enemies. There were only eternal interests. In front of the Sacred Shrine sect, the International Federation naturally had a common enemy like the Sacred Shrine sect and temporarily cooperated with Hurricane. Although it was a temporary alliance, at least they had a higher chance of winning. At the same time, Gong Jie was prepared for the worst. He issued an order to start preparing the orders requested by the Sacred Hall. 2 nuclear weapons, 3 in 1, and countless military munitions and ammunition. At the same time, the International Federation quickly replied to Hurricane's email. They expressed that they were willing to cooperate with Hurricane to eradicate the Sacred Shrine sect. However, the International Federation asked Hurricane unconditionally. Of course, Gong Jie was unwilling. The International Federation's goal was to eliminate the Shrine sect at all costs and regardless of the consequences. At all costs. In other words, they would not hesitate to sacrifice Hua Jin and the other 3 hostages. However, Hurricane's goal was to protect Hua Jin, Alice, and the other 2 at all costs, regardless of the consequences. Was not important. Chapter 44:18. To get rid of this tumor, they had to wait until the 4 hostages were safe. The cooperation between Hurricane and the International Federation was to reduce the risk. After all, if this order fell into the hands of the Sacred Church, it would be a huge threat to the world. But the International Federation didn't trust Hurricane completely. Hurricane's most optimistic idea was to protect the 4 hostages and prevent the order from falling into the hands of the Sacred Church. Therefore, Hurricane requested the International Federation to cooperate with Hurricane. But the International Federation wasn't willing. They didn't trust Hurricane. In their eyes, Hurricane and the Sacred Church were equal threats. Why would the police be willing to stand on the same side as the world's #1 army and become allies? While the 2 sides were in a stalemate, an accident suddenly happened. Early in the morning, Gong Jie was called to the office by Gong Xiaoying. In the office, Gong Xiaoying pushed a laptop in front of Gong Jie with a gloomy expression. "This is a new document sent by the Sacred Church. Take a look." Looking at Gong Xiaoying's expression, Gong Jie suddenly realized that the situation wasn't good. He looked at the laptop that had turned off and then looked at Gong Xiaoying's gloomy expression. He suddenly realized that the sacred church had made a new move. He opened the laptop and stopped at the email. In the email, there was a video file. He suddenly didn't dare to open it. What is this? Gong Jie looked at Gong Xiaoying with a trembling voice. Gong Xiaoying turned to look at him with a gloomy expression. Take a look for yourself. Gong Jie didn't dare to open it. Gong Xiaoying sighed deeply. I'm guessing that there are spies sent by the sacred church to the International Federation. Or maybe some of the internal members were bribed. It's also possible that the sacred church has a top hacker who intercepted the email sent to you by the International Federation. They know that Hurricane and the International Federation are working together and are probably angry. Gong Jie's body stiffened. He roughly understood what the content of the video was. Shao Jie, bang. Gong Jie slammed his fist on the table. His face was extremely gloomy. Along with the heavy punches, a few cracks appeared on the glass-paved table. Gong Xiaoying didn't mince his words. The Church of the Sacred Shrine already knows that the Hurricane Force has reached an agreement with the International Federation. In my opinion, we might as well terminate the cooperation with the International Federation. Otherwise, if this continues, the hostages' lives will be in danger. Gong Jie took a deep breath and finally decided to watch the video first. After weighing the pros and cons in his heart, he finally opened the video. As soon as the video was played, a hostage was tied up in a dark room, unable to see the sun. In the dim light, Gong Jie could vaguely make out that the man in a balaclava sitting on the chair was none other than Romanka. His head was hanging to the side. He was obviously drugged and was unconscious at this moment. Then, a dark-skinned, weirdly dressed man walked behind Romanka with a butcher's knife. Gong Jie's heart almost jumped out of his throat. His hand that was holding the mouse trembled uncontrollably. Chapter 44:19. As the video progressed, Gong Jie saw the man violently remove the hood on Romanka's head and splash a basin of salt water on him. The salt water corroded the wounds on Romanka's body. He suddenly woke up and screamed hysterically in pain. His screams were hoarse and terrifying. Through the computer, his voice of despair could be heard. No, I beg you, don't. Romanka, who had always been calm, finally showed the uneasiness of facing death. The man made him face the camera. When Romanka looked at the camera, his desire to live was almost undisguised. I beg you, don't kill me. The man grabbed his hair and ordered him, Do you still remember what I taught you? Romanka swallowed hard and quickly nodded. I remember. Speak. Long live the sacred palace. Long live the sacred palace. Romanka shouted pathetically and humbly at the camera. Long live the sacred palace. Long live the sacred palace. The next second, the man smiled viciously. The murderous aura on his face was almost unconcealed through the screen. He raised the knife and pointed the sharp side at Romanka's throat. Then, he slashed back and forth. Gong Jie slammed the laptop shut. He couldn't bear to watch anymore. Gong Xiaoying smoked a cigarette. His gaze was complicated. Is he dead? Gong Jie didn't finish watching the video and asked him for confirmation. Gong Xiaoying was silent for a while. Then he slowly said, He was beheaded. The sacred palace's methods are ruthless. This time, they sent us a video to promote their martial arts and try to intimidate us. Gong Jie shuddered at the thought once more. It wasn't the first time he saw the horror of beheading. However, this was definitely the most uneasy he had ever felt. Because this time, the ones in the sacred palace's hands were Hua Jin, Alice, and Natalia. He was afraid that if he angered the sacred palace again, the next one might be Alice. Or maybe he was protecting Natalia. Perhaps it was Hua Jin. When Gong Jie thought of Hua Jin sitting on the chair and being honorably beheaded, he felt a chill run down his spine. Now, he couldn't care less about being surprised. Why did Hua Jin's life and death actually make him so nervous? Father, what should I do now? Gong Jie, who had always been decisive, was at a loss for the first time. It wasn't that he couldn't think of a way, but that he didn't dare to make a rash decision. He was suddenly afraid of taking risks. Because the risk he was facing this time was not something he could bear no matter what. I said, no matter what, terminate the cooperation with the International Federation. You know that the organization that the Sacred Palace sect hates the most is the International Federation. For them, the International Federation is their biggest enemy. If you cooperate with the International Federation, you will be provoking the Sacred Palace sect. Gong Jie was stunned for a moment. He held his forehead in annoyance, and his 5 fingers went into his hair. His face was pale. Okay, I will immediately terminate the cooperation with the International Federation. And what's next? Are you willing to take the risk? Gong Xiaoying looked at him deeply. Gong Jie looked at him. After a moment of silence, he said firmly, I am willing. Chapter 44:20. In the conference room. The cold incandescent lights were on. Gong Jie's back was facing the crowd as he leaned back in his chair. He was deep in thought as he looked at the information about the divine sacred temple displayed on the big screen. Behind him, the crowd was discussing anxiously. What should we do? Alice is still in the hands of those evil cultists. The divine sacred temple? I'm afraid it's going to be a disaster this time. It's said that the divine sacred temple's base is in East Africa. It's a war-torn zone. Not to mention rescuing the hostage, it's not easy to just go in and leave calmly. Is young Master Jie really going to rescue her personally? A mercenary team of 5,000 people? It's not much different from a local battle. If so many people rush in at once, it'll create a huge commotion and be disadvantageous to the situation. Those evil cultists have a lot of eyes. If they know that Hurricane has sent so many people, they'll definitely fly into a rage and kill the hostage directly. Gong Jie swept a cold glance over them. Are you done talking? Everyone was instantly scared into silence. Gong Jie turned around and glanced expressionlessly at his subordinates sitting around the long table. He suddenly stood up and placed his arms on the table, his expression serious. I've decided. Vermilion Bird. The blonde woman immediately stood up. Yes. Gong Jie ordered, you, take 50 elite subordinates and escort the goods to East Africa with me. 50 people? Vermilion Bird raised her eyebrows but was a little worried. Young Master Jie, is 50 people really enough? It's enough. If there are too many people, it'll be difficult to control them. Although Gong Xiaoying had sent him a mercenary team of 5,000 people, it was just as some people had feared. If so many people went together, it would be too big of a commotion and alert the enemy. On the other hand, an elite team of 50 people would be easy to command and wouldn't attract attention. Vermilion Bird also understood Gong Jie's meaning. After confirming it, she nodded. After the meeting ends, I'll mobilize them immediately. Jed. Go and prepare the goods on the order immediately. Hearing this, Jed didn't wait for Gong Jie to finish his instructions before asking worriedly, Young Master Jie, are we really going to do as they say? Since when did Hurricane allow these small fries to lead him by the nose? Prepare the goods according to the Sacred Hall's requirements. Those things can trigger a war at any time. Gong Jie frowned. Have I finished? Jed lowered his head guiltily. Nuclear missiles, intercontinental missiles, air defense missiles, none of them are equipped with a missile head. A firearm without a missile was no different from a cell phone without a motherboard or a pistol without bullets. Jed immediately understood. Understood, I'll go prepare it right away. Vermilion Bird asked, when are we leaving? Wait for my orders. Gong Jie raised his wrist and looked at his watch. It was about time for the people from the Sacred Hall to reply. Last night, after leaving Gong Xiaoying's study, Gong Jie learned that someone from the Sacred Shrine had sent him another email, urging Gong Jie to prepare the goods as soon as possible. Gong Jie proposed a condition for the exchange. Before escorting the goods, Gong Jie had to confirm the safety of the hostages. However, as he expected, the people from the Sacred Hall were very cautious about this and rejected it immediately. Chapter 44:21. His attitude was firm. He claimed that the most important hostage to him had already been beheaded, and the remaining 3 hostages were dispensable. If they couldn't even confirm the safety of the hostages with a simple video call, then there was no need to talk about this deal. They could do whatever they wanted with the hostages. Gong Jie said this to weaken the confidence of the Sacred Palace sect. They had originally thought that Alice and Natalia would be the 2 most important hostages to Hurricane. while Romanka and Huajin would be on their list of targets to be executed. They originally planned to execute Romanka first as a show of strength. If Hurricane didn't cooperate, then they would execute Huajin to force Hurricane to submit. Gong Jie said this to make the Sacred Palace sect think that the 3 hostages weren't that important to Hurricane. This would weaken the Sacred Palace sect's confidence. Of course, Gong Jie also knew that the Sacred Palace sect wouldn't believe him so easily. But Hurricane also issued a warning. Once Jim gave the order to execute the hostages, then it would be the end of the Sacred Palace sect. At that time, Hurricane would use all its power to completely destroy the Sacred Palace sect. In fact, it would be easy for Hurricane to deal with the Sacred Palace sect. On this point, Jim knew what he was doing. However, Gong Jie's words were undoubtedly a threat. Although Jim had doubts about what Gong Jie said, and the 3 hostages were also doubtful about the importance of Hurricane. However, at least Hurricane was willing to sit down and negotiate with the Sacred Palace sect. This proved that the remaining 3 hostages were still valuable to Hurricane. However, Gong Jie's impatient attitude made Jim feel a little guilty. Soon, the Sacred Palace sect sent an email to confirm the video call at 8 o'clock in the evening. 8 o'clock in the evening. The Sacred Palace sect connected to Hurricane and sent a video call on time. Gong Jie accepted the video call. Soon, the blurry image of a person sitting on a chair appeared. Gradually, with the adjustment of the video, the image became clearer and clearer. The silhouette of Huajin's figure was reflected in his eyes. Huajin was tied up and sitting on a chair. Even though his head was covered with a black cloth bag, Gong Jie still recognized him at a glance. Based on the outline of his body, he could basically confirm that this hostage was Huajin himself. However, he seemed to be unconscious now. Huajin's head drooped to one side. His entire body was limp. He didn't seem to be sitting at all. Instead, he seemed to be tied to a chair. Gong Jie had a bad premonition. He gripped the table tightly but forced himself to calm down. What's wrong with him? He was afraid that something would happen to Huajin, but he was even more afraid that this was a trap set by the Sacred Hall. Perhaps they were testing him to see how worried he was about this hostage. Once Gong Jie showed any signs of nervousness, Huajin, as an important hostage, would become a bargaining chip for them. Therefore, Gong Jie didn't show any nervousness on his face. He deliberately kept his emotions calm. Why isn't he moving? Gong Jie questioned in fluent English. Through the screen, a masked evil cult member faced the camera and suddenly took out a knife from his back. Chapter 44:22. When Gong Jie saw this, the muscles on his face tightened. Could it be? Damn it! Was this person going to behead Huajin? Stop! Gong Jie was about to stop him, but he saw the person holding the knife and using the handle to hit Huajin's head. Ugh! With a muffled sound, Huajin's body trembled slightly, and he finally reacted. Don't worry, he's still alive. The evil sect member snorted disdainfully, obviously mocking Gong Jie for making a fuss over nothing. Gong Jie clenched his fists and said, "Take off the hood on his head." But I think your goal is to confirm whether the hostage is still alive. The rest is unnecessary. Gong Jie asked, "If I don't take off the hood, how am I supposed to confirm that the hostage is still alive, and not just any random person?" Oh, voice can't be imitated. In fact, voice is very easy to imitate. Let me repeat, I want to confirm the safety of the hostage. The evil sect member was suddenly annoyed. He raised the chopper in his hand and waved it in front of the screen, showing off his power. Don't play any tricks, and don't ask for so many harsh conditions. We've already shown you the video to confirm that he's not dead. What else do you want? Our leader is talking to you about this business with 100% sincerity. What right do you have to doubt us? Gong Jie said calmly, "Since you're 100% sincere, but you still beheaded a hostage. Is this sincerity? Sorry, I can't see any sincerity from you. You, take off the hood." Gong Jie's eyes turned cold. This is my last concession. Otherwise, we'll talk about the deal face to face. The evil sect member was so angry that he paced back and forth a few steps. However, in front of Hurricane, they did not dare to be too arrogant. Gong Jie's attitude made them uneasy. They were really worried that Hurricane would be indifferent to the 3 hostages. No matter what kind of kidnappers, they were most afraid of kidnapping hostages that had no value in negotiation. Therefore, they did not dare to be too presumptuous. Okay, this is also our last concession. The heretic walked to Hua Jin's side and tore off the black cloth bag in one swift motion. Hua Jin's weak and pale face was immediately reflected in his eyes through the screen. Gong Jie looked at Hua Jin, and for some reason, he felt an inexplicable palpitation in his heart. It was obvious that the evil sect members were not polite to him. A round of beating was unavoidable. There were some slight bruises on his face and some bloodstains on his neck. He didn't know how he got them. He was very weak now. So hungry. Water. 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 One could vaguely see that his lips were extremely dry and cracked. Other than that, his voice was very low, as if he had not eaten for days. Gong Jie was a little angry. It seems like they haven't eaten for a long time. The evil sect member did not think so. He won't die if he doesn't eat for a few days. But he said he's hungry and wants to drink water. You haven't given him water for a few days? That's none of your business. The evil sect member snorted. Anyway, we just need to make sure he's still alive. We don't care about the rest. Chapter 44-23. Gong Jie was getting more and more furious. Hua Jin, a man, was already in such a state. It was hard to imagine how Alice and Natalia, a weak woman and a young child, had been tortured by them. They probably didn't even give them a sip of clean water. Give him water. I'm warning you too. Don't ask for too much. Too much? This request was too much. Gong Jie was infuriated. If he could transmigrate, he would definitely rush past the screen and strangle this heretic. He said angrily, treat these 3 hostages well. It won't do you any harm. Boom. Through the video feed, one could vaguely feel the earth quaking and mountains shaking. The place where Hua Jin was seemed to have been bombed by artillery in the war-torn zone. The heretic said coldly, you've seen it too. There's a war going on here all the time, and there's a shortage of food. Gong Jie couldn't say another word. He turned his head and signaled with his eyes. His subordinates were also very smart. They immediately understood and began to investigate the location of the video. Gong Jie, is that you? Hua Jin seemed to have regained some of his consciousness. In his daze, he muttered a few words. Gong Jie immediately replied, it's me. The 2 of them communicated in Mandarin. The heretic obviously didn't understand Mandarin. Worried that Hua Jin would use Mandarin to send a message to Gong Jie that would be unfavorable to them, he immediately chopped him with his hand. Hua Jin let out a muffled groan, but he resisted the urge to scream. Gong Jie said, don't worry. Wait for me. I'll make sure that you'll be safe. Okay. Hua Jin didn't dare to say anything more. It wasn't that he submitted to the people from the sanctuary, but he was worried that Gong Jie would be too worried. That's it. Hurry up and prepare the things we need and set a time and place. We can't wait that long. With that, the video signal was cut off. Gong Jie slammed his fist on the table and gritted his teeth in anger. Young Master Jie, we've located their location. Where? The coordinates have been generated, but they are in a neutral zone between 2 war zones. Although they are not in the war zone, they are in the middle. No wonder the people of the Temple of Light wanted a large number of armaments. He sucked in a deep breath of cold air. All right, we'll leave tomorrow morning. Gong Jie ordered. Vermilion Bird worriedly walked over and looked at Gong Jie. Do you have to go personally? This time, it bodes ill rather than well. Why don't you leave it to me? We will definitely bring the 3 of them back safely. Vermilion Bird was a mercenary, and as a mercenary, they had always lived through life and death. To them, there were only benefits and they were not afraid of death. But Gong Jie was different. They did not trust Gong Jie to go to such a place personally. It was simply risking his life. I'm worried if you guys go. Why? Vermilion Bird was a little puzzled. Young Master Jie, forgive us for being blunt. Hurricanes can accept losing a subordinate like Alice, but they can't accept that you're in danger. In their eyes, no matter how many Alices were, they couldn't compare to Gong Jie. What's more, Hua Jin and Natalia, two insignificant people, were involved. Vermilion Bird was especially cold-blooded, but she was absolutely loyal to her employer. In her eyes, these three hostages were worthless, but she was unwilling to let Gong Jie take the risk. Chapter 44-24. He turned around abruptly, his handsome eyes sweeping across her as he questioned, "Am I your master?" "Then, as a subordinate, why are you questioning your master's orders?" This sentence left the Vermilion Bird speechless. In her mind, Gong Jie was the king and she was the subject. Therefore, she had to obey Gong Jie's orders unconditionally. But Zhu Ke wanted to say something, but Gong Jie glanced at her. Zhu Ke lowered her head guiltily. "I understand." East Africa. In the confinement room, every corner was covered with cobwebs. Rats ran rampant and mosquitoes and flies flew everywhere. There was not even a vent here. There was no daylight and dust filled the air. It was extremely turbid. The small space was filled with the smell of blood. The door suddenly opened. Hua Jin was pushed in. His feet were chained. He staggered and fell face down on the ground. Alice was nervous. She was in a semi-conscious state. Because she had only eaten a small amount of rice and water for a few days, she was a little muddle-headed. Hua Jin's muffled groan woke her up. However, she did not dare to say a word, not even a word of concern. Her eyes were covered by a blindfold, so she could not see anything. She could only hear Hua Jin groaning in pain. "Shut up. Keep quiet. This son of bitch." One of the cultists kicked Hua Jin a few times before leaving, cursing and swearing. The door of the confinement room slammed shut again. Alice did not dare to say a word. She looked up. In her memory, just 2 days ago, she and Hua Jin exchanged a few words in Chinese. Through the 24-hour surveillance camera, a group of evil sect members immediately rushed in and punched and kicked them. She did not dare to speak to Hua Jin again. Originally, Alice thought that no one would dare to do anything to them because they were backed by Hurricane. She saw Romanka being beheaded and his throat slit with her own eyes. She completely realized that this group of evil cultists were inhumane. They were not afraid of the hurricane at all. In order to save her life, Alice swallowed her anger and didn't dare to speak out again. Hua Jin, on the other hand, had never suffered like this before. Even though the filming environment was extremely harsh, it was not even 1/10,000th of this place. Not to mention, it was a fear that could not be hidden. He didn't even know what these crazy cultists would do in the next second. Every minute of his life was extremely precious to him. He didn't even know if he would live to see the sun rise tomorrow. In fact, the cultists did give them some food and water to eat. In fact, whether it was Alice, Hua Jin, or Natalia, they were all very important to them. After all, the hostages were their bargaining chips in the negotiations with the hurricanes. Before the negotiations were successful, they naturally hoped that the hostages would live well. But the rice and water given to them every day was pitifully little. They were originally in a war-torn zone. When the war broke out, Jim also wanted to migrate, but they were caught between the anti-government armed forces and the Orthodox army, so they could not move an inch. So, they requested to negotiate with the hurricanes. Because of the war, the clean rice and water they had was already very precious. Therefore, the food given to the hostages was naturally even less. Chapter 44-25. Hua Jin came back after being beaten up. As soon as the cultists left, he struggled to kneel on the ground and vomited a mouthful of blood. He raised his head and struggled to move in the direction of Alice based on his vague memory. His hands and feet were chained. In order to prevent him from escaping, his eyes were also covered with a black cloth. He moved to Alice's feet and leaned against the wall with his back against her. Alice stretched out her palm. Then, Hua Jin stretched out his finger and struggled to write on her palm stroke by stroke. Alice had a hard time trying to decipher the words with the help of his hand gestures. Hua Jin wrote a few sentences. "Just now, Gong Jie had a video call with them to confirm whether we are still alive. It seems that he is ready to take action. Alice, don't give up. We will definitely live well." Alice took a deep breath and seemed to feel that the wounds on her face were gradually not painful. She stretched out her blood-stained finger and wrote on Hua Jin's palm. I will persevere. You must persevere too. Okay. We will definitely wait until Gong Jie comes to save us. The two of them struggled to rely on their hands and write on their palms, passing the message to each other. Natalia also woke up slowly. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling deck. The corners were full of cobwebs. Her stomach was growling with hunger, but she knew that it was not time for dinner yet. No matter how hungry she was, it would not help. Are we going to die? Natalia grumbled, feeling wronged. In fact, she was not afraid of death. Since she was kidnapped here, Hua Jin and Alice took care of her a lot. At least, she was spared from a lot of beatings. Under the protection of Hua Jin and Alice, she did not suffer much except for not being able to eat enough, sleep well, and wear warm clothes. However, it was because of this that Natalia was extremely distressed. Although she was still young, she knew very well how much Hua Jin and Alice had suffered for her. Because of frustration and guilt, she could not hold on any longer. If she could, she would rather bear the pain for Hua Jin and Alice. It was time to deliver food. Hua Jin and Alice had already figured out that there were guards around the confinement room. However, this group of guards was usually on duty for 12 hours. Moreover, after 12 hours, they would be replaced. However, Hua Jin and Alice's judgment of time had been completely blurred after being in the dark for many years. Just now, Hua Jin's had to head from the confinement room to another room, because he had no idea what time it was. But he vaguely guessed that it should be time for the shift. At the same time, this also meant that this was the 4th day since they arrived. The 4th day, Hua Jin let out a silent sigh. Hua Jin, Alice lowered her voice and called him in a voice that was almost inaudible. Hua Jin turned his head and met her eyes. The window was nailed with wooden boards, but the morning light outside the window shone in through the gaps. With the weak light, Hua Jin saw that Alice's eyes were filled with worry. Do you feel scared? After all, it was not the first time Alice had encountered something like this. But for Hua Jin, it was the first time in his life that he had been kidnapped. Scared. Of course I'm scared. Chapter 44:26. Hua Jin was also a layman. He was not a saint, so he did not care about death. He was also afraid of death. He was even more afraid of such an inhumane death. When he closed his eyes, Romanka's tragic death still appeared in front of his eyes. Just thinking about that miserable scene made him want to vomit, as if there were countless things in his stomach churning. He was stunned and swallowed the things that had originally surged up his throat. He did not eat much to begin with. If he vomited some more, his body would not be able to hold on for much longer. Natalia finally could not take it anymore. She suddenly said, "Don't give me food anymore, okay?" Alice and Hua Jin looked at her in surprise. Natalia said, "I know that you have always wanted to protect me. Moreover, although you don't say it and always hide it, I have always known that you have secretly given me your food. Actually, there is no need. I don't need to eat so much. If you eat so little, you will definitely collapse." Natalia, Alice smiled and said, "We are fine. Don't worry, I don't want to live alone." Natalia finally cried out in despair. After coming here for so long, she had been so strong that she had not shed a single tear. However, when she woke up and saw Hua Jin covered in injuries again, and thought about how Hua Jin had been beaten up in order to protect her, she could not take it anymore. Her emotions broke down and she completely broke down. "I want to live with you. If anything happens to you, I won't be able to live either." Natalia clenched her fists tightly and was so sad that she cried. "Don't give me food anymore. I can hold on. Let's live together, okay?" Hua Jin looked at Alice and was extremely touched by Natalia's words. Gratified. His Natalia was actually so gentle. In such a desperate situation, not every child could be so calm, indifferent to life and death, and even think about others. "Don't worry," Alice said, "we will definitely be able to wait until Gong Jie comes to save us." At the mention of Gong Jie, Natalia's eyes lit up with hope. "He will definitely come and save us. We can't just give up like this. Don't be so dejected." "Yes." Reporting, young Master Jie. Everything has been prepared. When do we set off? Young Master Jia, the 50 elites are all in position. I have also prepared all the supplies needed for the journey. We are just waiting for your orders. The harbor. A huge armed cargo ship was quietly docked at the coast. There were still people moving things back and forth onto the cargo ship. This cargo ship was carrying munitions worth tens of millions of dollars. Gong Xiaoying looked at the harbor, still in disbelief. He turned to look at Gong Jie and asked tentatively, "Are you really not going to consider adding more members? 50 people? You are facing the Divine Temple sect, which has thousands of followers." Gong Jie smiled. "Like you said, it's 5,000 believers, not 5,000 soldiers. 50 people are more than enough to deal with 5,000 disciples. Of course, I don't think those 5,000 followers are that scary." Chapter 44:27. Gong Jie glanced at Gong Xiaoying expressionlessly and said casually, "You're wrong. They're allies." Gong Xiaoying was shocked, but he quickly calmed down. He knew that his son's ability to remain calm in the face of danger was what he was most proud of. No matter how dangerous the situation was, he could always turn it into a safe one. "My son never disappoints me." Gong Xiaoying patted his shoulder lightly. "However, in a place like East Africa, it's best to be careful." At this time, Gong Jie was already fully armed. He was wearing a handsome combat uniform and a military-style windbreaker. However, his silver hair was dyed black. Gong Xiaoying then realized that Gong Jie had unknowingly become a high-spirited man. At 1.9 meters tall, he was much taller than him. He did not know if it was because he had grown taller or because he was getting older. Gradually, he was no longer young and his height was slowly shrinking. Do you think that when people get older, their height will also become shorter? Gong Xiaoying wanted to ease the tense atmosphere before departure, so he changed the topic. He asked half jokingly and half seriously. Gong Jie glanced at him coldly. "Don't make such a lame joke." "All right, I'll stop joking." Gong Xiaoying pursed his lips and suddenly went forward to give him a big hug. Even Gong Jie was taken aback by this. Since they were young, Gong Xiaoying had always been reserved and not good at expressing his concern for him. This was the first time that Gong Xiaoying, as a father, had taken the initiative to hug him. His hug made his expression a little unnatural. Gong Jie awkwardly turned his head and cleared his throat. "What's the matter? It's just a farewell. It's not like I won't be coming back. I'm just afraid that something will happen to you and I won't be able to see you again," Gong Xiaoying said sourly. After saying that, he even pretended to wipe his tears. Gong Jie looked at him coldly. "You seem to be hoping that I don't come back? Since when? Then why do I feel like you're cursing your son? As a father, of course I hope that my son will be well. How can I hope that my son won't come back?" Gong Jie was speechless. Gong Xiaoying said, "All right, let's set off early. I'll wait for you." Gong Jie nodded and gave Gong Xiaoying a hug. Then, he turned around and boarded the armed cargo ship. Before Zhu Ke boarded the cargo ship, she nodded at Gong Xiaoying. Gong Xiaoying called out to her. "Vermilion bird. I'll leave little Jie's safety in your hands." Gong Xiaoying taking the initiative to talk to her made Vermilion bird feel very honored. She immediately lowered her head and said firmly, "I will do my best, even if it costs me my life, to bring young Master Jie back safely." It was a 12-hour flight from Dark Wind Island, through the Strait of Malacca, across the Atlantic Ocean and from East Africa. However, this was already the shortest and fastest journey. There was a port in East Africa that was still well protected. However, because of the war, several airports in East Africa had been severely damaged, and all flights to other parts of the world had been suspended. The airports were in a state of stagnation and were completely paralyzed. Many countries were evacuating their nationals through the only port, Sofia Port. Chapter 44:28. Hurricane also had troops stationed in East Africa. At that time, when the ship docked at the port, the troops stationed in East Africa would come to pick them up. The voyage at sea was extremely boring, and they had to deal with the harsh sailing environment. On the day of departure, they encountered a storm. At night, the sea breeze was very strong, and the waves hit the cargo ship. Even the experienced Gong Jie could not sleep well at night. When he slept on the bed, he felt dizzy, as if he was lying on the top of the waves. He wanted to vomit, but because he did not eat anything, he could not vomit at all. All communication relied on the satellite phone. On the ship, they could not eat anything too greasy. Other than nutritious cans, pure water, and all kinds of fruits, meat was basically eliminated. Gong Jie could not sleep, so he came to the deck early, chewing on a nutrition bar, and looked at the sunrise on the horizon with a calm expression. "Did you not sleep at all last night?" Zhu Kei's voice came from behind. Gong Jie turned around and glanced at her. "Why are you not asleep?" "It's my turn to be on duty tonight." Zhu Kei strode over. "Immediately. I'm going to rest for a while. If I don't rest well, how can I deal with the next battle?" As a mercenary, Zhu Kei had a very powerful ability. That was, no matter when, where, what happened, whether sitting, lying, kneeling, or lying down, as long as she closed her eyes and wanted to sleep, she could quickly fall asleep in 10 seconds without being affected by the environment. This was not considered powerful. What was really powerful was that even when she was asleep, she could control when she woke up. She remembered that once, when she was carrying out an operation in the wild, she was lying on the battlefield, surrounded by corpses. The place where she lay was full of stinking blood. But when she closed her eyes, she quickly fell asleep. The rain of bullets and cannon fire did not wake her up. Under the cover of the trenches, she slept very peacefully. At night, the war subsided, and she had enough sleep. When she woke up, she snuck into the enemy's base with her own strength and killed the exhausted enemy one by one. Zhu Kei was absolutely an outstanding mercenary. For her, as long as the target was chosen by her employer, to her, killing was no different from stepping on an ant. Sometimes, Gong Jie was envious of her good quality of sleep. Gong Jie bit on the nutrition bar and suddenly asked curiously, "How did you do it?" "What? Sleeping when you want to, this is also a kind of ability." Sometimes, Gong Jie would have insomnia. Sometimes, he would dream of many people. Mu Qingqing Yun Shishir, those messy people made up a messy dream. So much so that no matter how long he slept, he still felt groggy. The vermilion bird smiled and walked over. She leaned against the railing and enjoyed the sea breeze. She calmly said, "Because besides killing people, I have nothing to worry about." She didn't have any burdens or concerns. He had no family, no lover. To her, she was all alone in the world and did not need to worry about anything. At the same time, feelings were a huge taboo for her. Whenever she touched it, it would become a burden to her. Therefore, even though he was almost 27 years old, he was still alone. "Won't you feel lonely?" Gong Jie smiled. "Your life is made up of smelly things. Money. Would such a person really not feel lonely?" Chapter 44:29. Vermilion Bird disagreed. "I've been alone since I was born, and I'll be alone until I die." She came alone, and she left alone. Not a sound was heard. Gong Jie looked at her quietly and suddenly said, "Being a mercenary is not a long-term plan, and it's not a lifelong business. People will eventually grow old. When you're old, you won't have the strength to hold a gun or fight anymore. What will you do?" "Retire." Vermilion Bird said, "I've already thought about it. When I'm 35, I'll retire. I'll buy a high-end condominium in the busiest part of Los Angeles and raise a Doberman. That's the most comfortable life I can imagine." "You've never thought about marriage?" "Marriage?" Vermilion Bird heard this and laughed. "Marriage is so scary. This word is a disaster for me." Vermilion Bird smiled. "I won't get married. Not in this lifetime. What a lonely life." Gong Jie commented mercilessly. "What about you?" Vermilion Bird laughed coldly. "Aren't you lonely? Young Master Jie, you're almost 30. When are you going to get married and have children?" "Get married?" Gong Jie silently swallowed all the energy bars. He smirked as he chewed. "You don't seem to be interested in women." Vermilion Bird said as she inched closer to him. "Logically speaking, when a man stands in front of me, his breathing rate will quicken, his face temperature will rise, and his breathing will become hurried. But you don't seem to be moved?" Vermilion Bird was a very beautiful woman. She had a head of natural blonde hair, a fair face, and deep eyes that could capture one's soul. No matter what man stood in front of her, they would feel helpless. Gong Jie looked at her expressionlessly and suddenly said something that could choke her to death. "Oh, you're a woman. Why can't I tell?" Vermilion Bird resisted the urge to vomit blood. Gritting her teeth, she asked, "How can you not tell that I'm a woman?" Short hair, cold temperament, a pair of eyes staring at others like a leopard, the murderous intent in his eyes is very strong. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and said, "Sorry, I can't imagine you as a woman." Vermilion Bird lowered her head and looked at herself. Combat uniform, bulletproof vest, knee-high combat boots, a defensive master sword and 2 desert eagles were fastened to her waist. It seemed that the murderous aura was indeed very heavy. "Are you sure you're not bragging?" Gong Jie teased. "If any man is interested in you, he's the one with the wrong orientation." The Vermilion Bird was left speechless. She flicked her fringe and said coldly, "Forget it. We're talking the same language." With that, she turned around and continued her patrol. Gong Jie couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that his poisonous tongue had hurt her. Gong Jie turned around and leaned against the railing, recalling Zhu Kei's words. "You don't seem to be interested in women." Gong Jie didn't notice it before. But it was true. It wasn't that women had never appeared around him. But he didn't seem to be interested in women of all shapes and sizes. But he wasn't interested in men either. Chapter 44:30. In the afternoon of the next day, the cargo ship had arrived at its destination. The ship gradually approached the port. Gong Jie left a few dozen men on the ship to guard the armaments. He brought Vermilion Bird and a few elites down the ship. Gong Jie and his men were in disguise. They wore a robe and a hat, but as soon as they got off the ship, he vaguely sensed that there were countless pairs of eyes staring at him and sizing him up. He didn't know if these people were from the sacred shrine. They probably already knew that the Hurricane Group's cargo ship would be docked at the port at this time, so they sent people to check the situation. The cargo ship was docked at the port, but Gong Jie wasn't worried about them hijacking the ship. Even the international armed forces were wary of the Hurricane Group's cargo ship. The cargo ship had so much space. When the Hurricane Group modified the ship, they didn't want to waste any space. Even the smallest space was stuffed with an interceptor missile. Even the crazy cult members wouldn't have the courage to get close to the cargo ship. They wouldn't dare to rob the cargo ship unless they were tired of living. However, the news of the arrival of the Hurricane Group's munitions would definitely be sent back to the sacred shrine. Gong Jie didn't show any abnormalities. He pretended to be a passerby. Soon, he felt that the eyes that were sizing him up quickly dispersed. The ship was far away from the port. At the same time, the Hurricane Group's troops stationed in East Africa sent a car to pick them up. Gong Jie and Vermilion Bird got into the car and closed the door. "Young Master Jie." The driver greeted him in a low voice. Gong Jie said, "Cut the crap and drive." The Hurricane Group was stationed in East Africa and set up a headquarters. Most of the Hurricane Group's markets were in the North American and African markets. In the North American market, the bulk of the orders were from the Mexican government. As for the African market, East Africa wasn't a free market. However, it was a transportation stronghold that led to South Africa. To go to South Africa, one had to pass through East Africa. Hence, the Hurricane Group had already set up an absolutely mature freight route in East Africa. At the same time, in order to dispatch goods, Hurricane set up a command center in East Africa and stationed many relay stations. Most of the munitions relied on airplanes and waterways. Goods were transported to the target port by waterways, then unloaded from the port and transported to the target by container trucks. These stations were used to resupply these trains. In addition to the necessary gasoline, there were also food and military supplies. At the same time, these stations were also responsible for collecting intelligence and relaying intelligence. Before they left, Gong Jie had sent the coordinates of Hua Jin's location to these relay stations in Morse code. The relay station was responsible for collecting information and accurately locating Hua Jin's location. Gong Jie's idea was very simple. Simply and crudely, he would charge into the headquarters of the Holy Church, then control all the cultists and rescue the 3 hostages. After that, the fate of the Sacred Hall would be handed over to the International Federation. Since he had already offended the Sacred Hall, Hurricane would not tolerate the existence of such a malignant tumor. However, the intelligence gathered by several relay stations made Gong Jie realize that this matter wasn't so simple. I think the Sacred Hall has already transferred the hostages separately. Transferred separately? Chapter 44:31. The subordinate reported to him, the 3 hostages have been transferred to different places. In other words, Gong Jie followed his words, once one of the hostages is rescued, the Sacred Hall will get the news and the other 2 will lose their lives. Gong Jie frowned and tapped his fingers on the table. He hesitated. Red Sparrow said, "Is it difficult? Locate the 3 hostages and rescue them in batches. We brought 50 elites and divided them into 3 teams to infiltrate the Sacred Hall's secret hideout and catch them all in one fell swoop." Gong Jie agreed with Red Sparrow's suggestion. The vermilion bird had a wealth of experience, so she had an excellent reaction time to deal with such situations. However, the subordinate sighed and revealed a worried expression. "Officer Red Sparrow, it's not that we haven't thought of your idea. However, after being stationed in East Africa for so long, we've dealt with the Sacred Hall many times. They're definitely not as simple as you think. You may not be familiar with their behavior, but we're very familiar with it. Living in East Africa, what the civilians are most afraid of is not the government army or the anti-government army, but the Sacred Hall and the Guidaman terrorist organization. Their methods are extremely cruel and inhumane. It's not something we can imagine. I think that once the Sacred Hall's people know that the Hurricane's cargo ship is docked, they'll tie a special device to the hostages to prevent the Hurricane's mercenaries from rescuing the hostages." Gong Jie's expression turned solemn at once. "What special device?" "There'll be an explosive device on the handcuffs of the hostages. These devices are connected to a network. In other words, the handcuffs of the 3 hostages are connected. Once one of the handcuffs breaks or the lock is unlocked, the handcuffs of the other 2 hostages will explode. At that time, the other 2 hostages will be blown into a pile of flesh and blood. We have a few subordinates who were taken hostage by the Sacred Hall. We tried to rescue them, but the handcuffs were unlocked and the other 3 hostages were blown into a pile of flesh and blood." Even though it was a plain narration, one could still imagine how frightening that scene was. Red Sparrow listened but didn't say anything. She was already used to such scenes. A mother-child linkage device? Red Sparrow immediately thought of the name of the device. "I remember seeing this device when I was on a mission. In fact, it's not a high-tech method. It's a very simple principle. The 3 handcuffs have an explosive point and a linkage device. If one of the devices is opened, then the other 2 devices will automatically switch to the explosive point and cause an explosion. How do we solve it?" Gong Jie suggested, "If you're not in a hurry to remove the handcuffs, why don't we rescue the 3 hostages first and find a way to access the device after we return to Hurricane City?" Hearing this, the vermilion bird fell into silence. She turned around, crossed her arms, and said solemnly, "So far, I've never seen this kind of explosive device that can be neutralized." "What do you mean?" Chapter 44:32. In other words, once these handcuffs are put on, they can't be unlocked. In other words, once the Sacred Hall sect handcuffs them, no matter if it's us or them, we won't be able to unlock the device. Gong Jie was furious. In other words, from the beginning, the Sacred Hall sect wanted to kill them? You can say that. The Sacred Hall sect never thought of letting the hostages leave alive. Gong Jie frowned. It seemed that this matter was much more difficult than he had imagined. "Then what about this?" Red Sparrow said. "First, unlock the handcuffs and bring Hurricane back. There are so many people in Hurricane, can't they figure out a way to unlock it? When the time comes, as long as they figure out a way to unlock the handcuffs, it won't be too late to unlock them. In short, the most important thing is to get the hostages out of here safely." "That's true, but... Red Sparrow was finally impatient. "But what? Do you think that such a big hurricane can't even unlock a simple linkage device?" No, the man was obviously in awe of Red Sparrow. He said in a trembling voice. When the linkage device is activated, it will start a countdown. This kind of linkage device has a time limit. Usually, it lasts for 7 days. If the handcuffs are not unlocked after 7 days, the linkage device will automatically explode, so Red Sparrow was completely stunned. She was also shocked by the cruelty and viciousness of the Sacred Hall sect. However, she had seen such things many times, so she was not surprised. Gong Jie's face was extremely gloomy. He had already guessed that the Sacred Hall sect was so arrogant and their way of doing things was quite extreme. When it came to dealing with hostages, they were inhumane. They didn't care about the hostages' lives. They only used them as bargaining chips. And they were so arrogant because of the value of these hostages. However, even if they knew that their rescue operation might be classified as useless, they would still try their best to save the hostages. Red Sparrow was also confused. I don't understand. They are so extreme. Aren't they afraid that we will give up on the hostages? At that time, Hurricane will target the Sacred Hall sect and launch a crazy revenge. Are they really not afraid of Hurricane? Evil sect. Who are the cults? Gong Jie said, the cults believe in God, but these fake Christians believe that God has been silently protecting them. They think that after they die, they can become gods and become immortal. Do you think they have any sense of reason? Since they are so loyal to God, why did they ask Hurricane to provide so many munitions? Because Bishop Jim is a pretty smart, sober man. He was taking advantage of the sincerity of the cultists to amass a huge fortune. Over the years, how many families had the Sacred Hall embezzled? Jim knew the truth of the world very well, but he used such nonsense to brainwash his followers and seize their property. Those believers are all poor people who have been deceived by him. A pitiful person must have a hateful side. No matter what, we have to rescue the 3 hostages first. Chapter 44:33. Yeah, I'll negotiate with Jim when the time comes. You're going to do it yourself? Vermilion Bird was a little worried. Young Master Jia, I think it's better if you don't do it yourself. Jim is a sly old fox. Who knows what kind of trap he has set for you? What a bunch of good-for-nothings. Who are those people around him? I heard that Jim spent a lot of money to hire a team of 100 mercenaries from Europe. However, these mercenaries have varying strengths and aren't a threat to me at all. Vermilion Bird was still a little worried. That's true, but in any case, don't underestimate the enemy. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Vermilion Bird and Gong Jie went their separate ways. To rescue the hostages, they didn't need to bring a large number of people. 3 groups of 5 were enough. The rest of the people were to follow Gong Jie around the clock and be on standby. Gong Jie released the news that they had arrived at the port with the goods and were waiting for Jim's reply. At night, Jim quickly set a time and place. San Jose Sports Center. San Jose Sports Center used to be the largest training ground in East Africa. It used to be the venue for military drills and reviews. It was also the venue for international sports events. Ironically, the training ground that used to impart the spirit of peace was now surrounded by constant crossfire, and many civilians were killed or injured. The 5 rings that symbolized peace were still hanging at the top of the training ground. Gong Jie brought his men to the sports center. The sky gradually darkened. They had agreed on a time, but Jim still didn't show up even after a long time had passed. Perhaps his men had already arrived, but seeing that Gong Jie had brought his men here, he secretly investigated the situation. He was obviously worried that Gong Jie had brought a few thousand men with him. Jim, this old fox, was still rather afraid of death. Gong Jie turned around and said to the team of mercenaries responsible for his safety, "Go somewhere else. Don't stand here." "But, young Master Jie," Officer Vermilion Bird said, "Officer Vermilion Bird isn't here now. Besides, I'm the chief commander. You just have to listen to my orders." "But, didn't you arrange for snipers?" Gong Jie lowered his voice and asked, "Are the snipers on standby?" "It's on standby. I'm worried that Jim's side has also sent a sniper. Where's the scout? Have him patrol the surroundings. Once he finds a sniper, kill him on the spot." "Yes, I understand." Gong Jie had arranged snipers around the training ground in advance. If Jim's side tried to harm him, they would kill him in advance. At the same time, the mercenaries would cover his safe escape. However, this was just in case. As expected, Jim did not dare to touch him. The mercenaries looked at each other and chose to listen to Gong Jie's orders, retreating to different places. It was just as Gong Jie had expected. Before long, Jim appeared with his men. Gong Jie sneered. This Jim was indeed a cunning old fox. He had been here for a long time, but when he saw such a big lineup, he felt afraid and didn't show up. A man walked over from afar, followed by a few strong bodyguards. Although they were dressed simply, Gong Jie knew that these were mercenaries disguised as evil sect members who were responsible for Jim's safety. Jim was dressed in a gray suit and leather shoes. He had a head of black hair and a deep outline. He was a typical white European. Chapter 44-34. You are the chief commander of Hurricane, Gong Jie? Jim came up and greeted him. Gong Jie was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. Where are the hostages? Don't be in such a hurry. Jim laughed. I've already made arrangements for the 3 hostages. When it's done, I'll return the 3 hostages to you. Would they really be returned unscathed? Jim didn't mention it. He only said that he would return the hostages. Who knew if he would return the hostages alive or 3 corpses? Gong Jie expressed his doubts. He raised his wrist and looked at the time. He said coldly, 3/4 of an hour later than the agreed time. Is this your so-called sincerity? Sorry, I can't see it. Even though Jim had 3 hostages in his hands, Gong Jie's aura was still biting cold and his posture was extremely domineering. He knew in his heart that with Jim's personality, the more he tried to please him and the more subservient he was, the more unscrupulous he would become. Forceful words would instead make him soften his attitude slightly. Gong Jie was very good at reading people. When a person stood in front of him, he didn't need to talk. He could tell the person's personality just by looking at the expression between their eyebrows and the small details. When Jim heard this, he wasn't angry. Instead, he said humorously, "You know, there's fighting everywhere now. It's already not easy for me to come to the agreement alive." Gong Jie asked again, "Where are the hostages?" Jim was silent for a while. He looked at Gong Jie warily. Although he was alone, he had already sent people to check before he came. A group of mercenaries had escorted him here. This meant that these mercenaries were hiding in a hidden corner. If they did anything to him, then the mercenaries hiding in the dark would shoot him dead at any time. Gong Jie's tough attitude was the perfect proof. I'll give you the goods at the same time. Jim had no intention of backing down. I have to see the goods, verify them, and count them. Only then will this deal be valid. After a pause, he said, however, I can't let Hurricane's people come here for nothing. I can't take so many goods for nothing. He gave him a look. One of his men immediately brought up an iron suitcase and placed it in front of Gong Jie. If Zhu Ke was by Gong Jie's side at this time, she would definitely be on high alert. This was because no one knew what was inside the iron suitcase. However, Gong Jie did not expect that there would be any dangerous devices in the box. It would do Jim no good to kill him. Jim's goal was very clear. It was the order worth tens of millions of dollars. Gong Jie's life meant nothing to him. Don't worry, there aren't any explosives inside. Jim explained. Inside, there's some diamond raw materials. After it's done, I'll also give you a few 100 kilograms of heroin as a reward. Haley Quinn? Gong Jie did not accept the offer immediately. Instead, he rejected it coldly. Hai Luo Yin is of no use to me. Hurricane never does business like this. Looks like Hurricane looks down on the drug business. Jim disagreed. But what's the use of drugs and munitions? They're all life-threatening things. Hurricane doesn't have to think so highly of themselves. I'll say it again. Chapter 44-35. Jim was extremely displeased with Gong Jie's haughty attitude, and his expression was already a little ugly. In fact, Gong Jie was stalling for time. Now, Vermilion Bird had infiltrated the cult in disguise to rescue the hostages. Given Jim's character, he would definitely send the most capable mercenaries to his side. As for the useless soldiers and crab generals left behind in the cult, Vermilion Bird did not care about them at all. Vermilion Bird had very strong anti-reconnaissance and investigative abilities. She would definitely be able to lead her men to rescue the hostages as soon as possible. But before that, Gong Jie had to stall for time as much as possible. If necessary, he would not hesitate to tie Jim up as a hostage. Let's go and inspect the goods first. Gong Jie sneered. It's useless to talk to you. With that, he stood still and waited for Jim's response. Naturally, he would not turn around immediately and leave his back to them. Jim could tell that Gong Jie was also very wary of him. He raised his eyebrows and suddenly asked, "Among the 3 hostages, there's a man who looks very attractive." When he said that, Gong Jie immediately realized that he was talking about Hua Jin and immediately became nervous. What's wrong? You're so nervous. Jim immediately smiled evilly. Don't tell me that this man has a special meaning to you. Gong Jie's facial muscles immediately stiffened. Don't tell me that this man is your favorite pet? This sentence undoubtedly angered Gong Jie. Favorite pet? This wasn't a nice way to address him. From what he knew, Jim liked women, but he also liked men. As long as it was attractive, he was very interested in it. To him, whether it was a man or a woman, they were just for his amusement. In other words, men and women were like dogs. They were pets, not humans. Obviously, he said this because he regarded Hua Jin as a pet in his eyes. There was no difference. He treated Hua Jin as Gong Jie's plaything, but such blasphemy made Gong Jie unhappy. He swore that when Hua Jin, Alice, and Natalia returned safe and sound, Hurricane would wash the headquarters of the Temple of Light with blood. What was there to be embarrassed about? It's not a rare thing for a man to like another man. Jim said, men and women are the same, they are all living creatures. In this world, there are only differences between gods, devils, humans, and ghosts. However, I am different from you. I am a god. Therefore, to be able to receive my gift is a great favor. If young Master Gong is interested, I have some pets for you to choose from. If you don't mind, you can pick a few pets and bring them back. It's not impossible. It's also a gift from me to Hurricane. Gift favor? What a disgusting metaphor. Gong Jie's face was full of disgust, but he didn't show it. He said indifferently, "It's getting late. I think you should also want to check the goods as soon as possible and then finish this business. Everyone's time is precious. Don't waste it on these boring things." Okay. Are the goods at the port? The port. It doesn't seem safe to trade at the port. Jim was also thinking. Why don't we transport the goods here? It was too risky to haul the goods back from the port. Chapter 44:36. Impossible. Gong Jie rejected him directly. He had no intention of handing these goods over to Jim. Doing this was just a delaying tactic. He was stalling for time so that Vermilion Bird would have more chances to rescue the hostages. Jim narrowed his eyes, secretly sizing up Gong Jie, and bluntly expressed his worries. If I follow you to the port, I don't know if you have any troops stationed there. When I reach the port, if I am ambushed by your men, wouldn't it be a waste? I won't take the risk like this. Gong Jie smirked. If I have any thoughts about you, I can get rid of you right here. But how can you guarantee that? Gong Jie smiled coldly, and then he snapped his fingers lightly. The next second, the mercenary standing closest to Jim was shot in the head by a sniper in the distance. The whistling bullet instantly penetrated the mercenary's head, and the warm blood splashed on Jim's body. The corner of his mouth that had not yet cooled down was stained with a trace of blood at the same time. Jim suddenly froze. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows. Is this enough to prove it? The mercenaries beside Jim reacted quickly, and almost at the same time, they pointed their guns at Gong Jie. Gong Jie had both hands in his trouser pockets, and in the face of the other party's hostile aura, he appeared indifferent. He did not think that Jim would dare to let these mercenaries shoot. And the more calm Gong Jie was, the more restless Jim became. He waved his hand and roared, "Damn it! Put down your guns. Do you want to kill me?" If they fired at Gong Jie, before Gong Jie fell, he would have been shot dead by the sniper in the distance. Jim was scared to death. Gong Jie glanced at him disdainfully. Do you really think that I came here for the 3 hostages? Jim, if you don't even have the attitude to personally inspect the goods at the port, not to mention you, even these mercenaries beside you won't be able to live for long. His tone was unyielding. However, being tough also required the ability to be tough. Jim knew very well that Gong Jie had the right to be tough. However, he was also certain that Gong Jie would not kill him so easily. He already knew this before he rushed over. This time, what awaited him was not a deal, but a game between the 2 sides. Jim also vaguely realized that perhaps the Gong Jie was stalling for time. At this moment, he might have already sent out troops to search for the 3 hostages. However, he was also very sure that the lives of the 3 hostages were in his hands. This was also the last bargaining chip in his hand. Gong Jie, I can go with you to the port, but I'm warning you, you better not play any tricks. Otherwise, if anything happens to me, those 3 hostages will definitely not be alive. Gong Jie had sent out Vermilion Bird. Even if he managed to find the hostages, he had to break through the encirclement of the heretics. If he managed to kill his way out, then Gong Jie would become a wanted criminal by the peacekeeping forces. Although they were members of an evil sect, they did not have the right to be shot to death. Gong Jie's expression was very ugly. He only prayed in his heart that Vermilion Bird could find the 3 hostages as soon as possible. Lead the way to the port. Jim took a step back.